All right. Good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and start the July 15th meeting of the Save Our Indian River Lagoon Citizens Oversight Committee. Let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Play ball. All right, here we go. It is summertime, right? Yes, baseball is back. And we will go ahead and have a roll call. Carol?
Yes, Lorraine Koss, I believe she
is remote.
Here remotely.
Okay. Charles Venuto has asked to be excused. Vinnie Toronto.
Here.
David Schur.
Here.
John Windsor.
Here.
Terry Casto. David Lane.
Here.
Laura Lee Thompson. Here. Stephanie Ely.
Here remotely.
Kimberly Newton. Courtney Barker has asked to be excused. We're expecting Todd Swingle. Susan Hodgers. Here. Eric Manis. Okay, so.
Okay.
Wait.
Carol, I believe the remote response was from Terry, not David. Is David? No, David's not. Yeah.
I'm sorry, who was it from?
Terry Casto
Terry
is
Casto.
remote.
Okay, Terry
Not
Casto
David
is
Lane.
remote. Okay.
Okay, and Todd's coming in. We're awesome. We're good.
Okay.
Todd, right here. Sorry, I know, I put you next to me. That's right. Well, you are the important one today because we now have quorum. All right, saved at the last minute. I like it. Okay, so we've got quorum. So since we now have quorum, I'll go ahead and look for a motion to accept virtual votes.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any public comment? All right, so we'll go ahead and take a vote for acceptance of virtual votes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Oop, I think that was a delayed aye, right, Lorraine? Or Stephanie? Okay. All right. So none opposed, then we'll go ahead and accept virtual votes. All right, we are good. So the next motion I'll look for is an approval of the agenda. Any motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All right. Any discussion for the agenda? Any public comment for the agenda?
Yeah, Vinny, I have a question.
Yes, Terry.
So there was a late arrival email on a subject having to do with retroactive payment. Is that going to be on the agenda for today?
While it is not on the agenda, we all did receive that, so I would recommend that we do handle that probably in new business. I would put it at item D, and since it came in last, that's when I was going to look to bring it up. It's a good question, Terry. Anybody have a feeling on that? Are they okay with bringing it up at the end of new business?
It's fine.
Okay. Terry, does that work for you?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for bringing it up. All right, so that was the discussion. Do we have any public comment on the agenda? Okay. Do you feel we need to amend the motion to add that to the agenda? Would you like that?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Windsor, I believe it's your...
Fine with the amendment, yes.
Okay, so Dr. Windsor accepts the amendment of adding the reimbursement email to item D under new business. So again, we'll go ahead and take a vote on that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. That's good. We'll move forward. All right, so the agenda passes. Now we'll go for the approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Okay? Okay, there's a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any discussion? Any public comment? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
All right. Then the minutes pass. So we'll go ahead and go to progress and fiscal reports. Virginia?
Okay, thank you, and good morning. For work completed this month, we had 8 more reimbursements for private homeowners upgrading their septic systems, for a total of 79 of those completed so far. Our UCF report this month on oyster reefs focused on sort of the ancillary benefits, one of the ancillary benefits of oyster reefs. So oysters are prized because of their amazing filtration capacities and volumes treated, but within those reefs are all sorts of other critters, many of which are also filter feeders. And so they found the presence of rib mussels, barnacles, ascidians, encrusting bryozoans, and sponges at all of the monitored sites. And so there's a lot more filtration going on at those reefs than just our successful oysters. In terms of work underway this month, the City of Melbourne's Grant Street Water Reclamation Facility confirmed with their staff yesterday they are very close to going to bid on that project. The South Central Sea Septic to Sewer project, that construction is a little more than 35% complete, and this lists the 82 of the 140 homeowners have been contracted for the connection grants. I think that number is closer to about 120 of them now, so really, really good progress on getting all the paperwork set up for those homeowners to connect as soon as those lines are available. We've also completed the permit applications to divide that project into 3 separate HOAs. And so as each of the 3 different segments is completed, we will file the completion paperwork with DEP, and that will allow us to go ahead and start connecting people in each HOA as soon as that portion of the project is done, instead of having to wait for the entire project, for all the lines to be complete before we start connecting people. Smoke testing is nearly complete. So when we prepared this a week and a half ago, the barrier island was complete, and the team was working in the Barefoot Bay service area. That area is also now complete, and they're working in Merritt Island with probably finishing up in a couple weeks. So that's like 28,000 houses that are being smoke tested. And Brandon, you just calculated the miles of line. You happen to, it's hundreds of miles of sewer line that's being tested. And they're filming a video, so you'll get more on that hopefully next month. The Miko Septic Sewer Project, we are expanding that project to also go sideways up Miko Road and capture 9 different businesses. We have a groundwater well in that area that has been recording some very high nutrient levels, and so that was a priority for us. We were able to get a grant to expand that project to capture those properties. The South Beaches O Septic to Sewer, the notice of award has been sent to the contractor, so that project should get under construction shortly. The City of Melbourne Grant Place Baffle Box, that project is under construction. The county has 2 stormwater projects in Scottsmore that have been awarded for construction. The contractor has asked for the county to delay our notice to proceed until they can get confirmation of when all the materials will be delivered, because we're still having supply chain issues, and it's very difficult for the contractors to get started and then be without supplies that they need and have to stop and start. So they're trying to get delivery dates secured for everything they need, and then set the time frame for that construction. The Sykes Creek Phase 1 muck dredging project, the dredge material management area construction is underway. They're making good progress preparing the island to dewater that dredge material. The Grand Canal muck dredging project continues to proceed with over 193,000 cubic yards removed to date. Cocoa Beach is deploying their oyster bar, the McNabb Oyster Bar, and our seagrass restoration protocol. We have sent some draft ideas to the seagrass experts in the various agencies, and are compiling their responses and coordinating with our consultant to incorporate those changes into the tool, and looking forward to having a final working document in another month or two. On presentations this month, I just wanted to highlight the Straight Talk event that happened on June 23rd. I don't know if anybody wants to say anything about that. I just wanted to highlight one other issue or one other item on the progress report, which is on the future topics. The top two topics in your list, the low-impact development and the performance and maintenance requirements for bioactivated media. I have secured a speaker for those topics at your next meeting in August.
Great, thank you. Dr. Windsor and then Laura Lee.
Okay. First of all, the Straight Talk event was outstanding. Anthony did a great job. Lots of questions coming from different directions, and he should be given a good pat on the back. Regards to topics for special presentations and also presentations this month going on elsewhere, there's been a lot of discussion about glyphosate in this committee and other places. The National Estuary Program has a STEM meeting coming up on August the 2nd. On August the 2nd, at that STEM meeting, there'll be a panel with 4 people talking about glyphosate. One of the authors, one of the panelists is an author of the paper that's widely cited about manatees and glyphosate accumulation in manatees in Brevard County and all over Florida, actually. And so I would urge anybody who has the ability to get down there. It's a daytime meeting. It's an afternoon meeting. It's in Grant Valcaria area. It's on Valcaria Road, Grant Valcaria Road. The details of the meeting are on the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program website, which is onelagoon.org. You see meetings information there. I would urge you to go. I would like to be there, but I'm going to be out of town that day, so I can't see it. And unfortunately, they don't record their meetings. So you either have to go or rely on somebody else, to get the information for you. But I thought that was important for this committee to know. I just found out about it yesterday.
All right, thank you, Dr. Windsor. Laura Lee.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. Yeah, unfortunately, they don't do Zoom for the IRL NEP meetings, and there's some really good presentations, but this will really be good. But I wanted to say that Vinny did an outstanding job at Straight Talk, too. He was great. We should have Vinny, we should just take Vinny around the community to talk about what we're doing with sorrel. Yeah, and the attendance was really good, and there were a lot of people there. Even though there's been 9 of them, there were a lot of people there that were new, that had never been to a Straight Talk before. I think it's an outstanding way to get people, educated about what it is that we're doing. It was really good.
Thank you. Anyone else? And let's do this real quick. Everyone remember to use your microphones. Everyone is, but I'm just saying, since we're online and on Zoom, make sure to turn them on and off. And then those at home, if you guys would like to speak, use the raise your hand button. And so why don't we just test that right now? Lorraine, Terry, Stephanie, if you guys just want to raise your hand or click the raise your hand button, that would be a good time to find it. There we go. Lorraine, like it. That just helps make sure the meeting go quicker. And distracts from the fact that I was giving praise, because who likes to accept praise? Come on now. But really, I would like to, all right, Stephanie, awesome, and Terry, thank you for checking the raise your hand button. I wanted to thank FIT and, of course, the Indian River Lagoon Coalition. An event like that, Straight Talk, takes months to plan. And so I would like to thank them for their time and effort and literally giving us and our work the stage. I told Dr. Windsor earlier that I enjoy bragging on all you all, because everyone on this committee works so hard, and the staff, Virginia, and your staff, and our staff, and So thank you, everybody, for doing that. Put me on stage and allow me to brag, and I'll talk forever. All right. Thank you for that. Okay. Anyone else have anything other than otherwise we will go to Crystal with our financials. All right. Crystal?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Go ahead and share. It says I am not allowed to share.
Brandon's got it up.
I don't know that he has the third chart, but we can go ahead and start with the graph. We are now currently at 263 million, which is our revenue from conception. We received our quarterly true-up in March, which was at 3.5 million. And March's collection is at 4.8 million. Both are the highest collection in a month of individually and together that we've received. April's collection was at 4.4 million. We are currently above projection by 3.5 million. And our extoral specific expenditures from conception is at 44.7 million. If you would please change to the report.
I'll do the multiple participants. Who can share? Yeah. Yeah. Crystal, you should be allowed to share now.
All right, let's see if it works. All right. And it appears. Okay, I think y'all can see what I see.
We do. We see what you see.
Wonderful. Okay, so as you can see, we're at 48.7 for our budget, and we've received 36.3 altogether. And this is our expenditures at the below for 12 million, but that is everything that you see here. Before I go on, are there any questions on these financials?
Todd has a question. Go ahead, Todd.
Not as much a question, just a comment. Or as we get years and years into this now, the first graph is starting to get challenging. I don't feel real strongly about this, but I'd recommend that we maybe limit ourselves to 3 lines, like the current year and the past 2. And if you want, you can have a little table down below that shows the end of year totals, just to kind of keep it visible. So don't feel strongly, but I think it would be better in terms of seeing current, so that we can really observe the current data on the graph more effectively.
Okay. We also have.
Todd, I do know that we have discussed it. And what came up with making it smaller had more to do with the ADA compliance, because if you show it in one spot, you have to show it in the other.
Crystal, can you show them the other graph format, and they may prefer that
Yes.
one?
That is
And
where I'm
just to
going.
clarify, all I'm suggesting is clip out the earlier years, so it wouldn't really change your format. Just don't go all the way back on that particular graph, because I don't know that it's that meaningful.
Don't graph all the way down to 0. Start at,
Sure, yeah, just set your,
yeah.
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 You mean a cumulative graph of everything in one straight line?
No, I think what he's saying is we just get rid of the first 3 years. And so we would start the graph at 100 million or somewhere in that spot.
The bottom
right,
of the
Todd?
y-axis would not be 0.
Yeah, you're-
It would be whatever the collections were.
like we're in
at the-
FY 22 now, so you'd show FY 20, 21, 22, and that's it. You'd get rid of 17, 18, 19 on that graph. I just,
Okay, we'll double check what we can and can't do.
Well, I just want to,
That is within my capability, I just don't know.
Crystal, go ahead and if you could finish your presentation, then Todd, I do want to talk about that, and if everybody feels that's it, we'll make a vote on that, but if you could, we'll talk about that after. Thank you.
All right, so this is another graph that I complete, and it's overlaid. Let me make sure I can get it bigger for y'all. So the top graph here, the top line, is showing this current year and how much higher we've been receiving compared to 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22.
Okay.
Do we have any questions on this overlay?
I don't think so.
Virginia, did you want to, or me to embellish on anything?
Well, I think this graph, more clearly illustrates that every quarter we get that extra quarterly distribution. And it also shows, despite, all of the wobbles and changes in our economy, the strength of the collections to date. You'll see in April of 2020, during the COVID shutdown, the green line, the lowest point on the graph was that month that captured the 6 weeks of shutdown. But then very quickly, as the state reopened, our revenues recovered back to normal. And then 21 and 22 have just continued to climb. So these revenues are always, there's a several month lag between when the stores collect the taxes and when they send those revenues and report those revenues to the state, and then when the state compiles it all and sends the money to us. And so we won't know what the latest changes in the stock market and consumer confidence. We won't see those impacts for another month or two, but so far our revenues continue to be really, really strong for this program.
Okay, Laura Lee?
Yeah, I can't see what's on, I can't read the numbers that are on the chart. What is on the bottom line? Are those months?
Yes, across
Okay, the very bottom line down here.
Okay, and what
Let
month
me see
does
if I
it
can
start
enlarge
with?
it better.
October.
Starts with October?
October is our fiscal year.
Okay, so when you see those big peaks, you can clearly see the impact of tourists and their contributions, no?
Those are,
No, ma'am. Actually, the quarterly true-up has to do with 3 months of taxes coming back to us. For example, someone bought a refrigerator in Orlando and they had it sent back to Titusville or Melbourne or Rockledge, and we get to collect those taxes because it was bought out of county and then brought back to our county.
So the 4 teepee-looking things, those are when the collections are like added up and reported. Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Terry?
Yeah, I don't find this particular chart that helpful. It's too confusing. It's got this reporting anomaly built into it that leads to questions like Laura Lee's. Why is it going up and down? So that's my first thought. The second is I'd like to reinforce the recommendation on the previous one of we're going to run out of room on that other chart. I hope we're not going to find a reason not to be able to just summarize the first 2 or 3 years of performance and start, as I think Virginia suggested, for Benny, starting the third graph at 100 million or whatever 3 years back would be. That graph to me is more informative and showing, the projected plans and then our actuals all in one summarizing kind of report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, we'll,
I understand.
go ahead, Crystal, please, go ahead, sorry.
No. This is just one of the reports that I run that is more internally, and this just shows month-to-month comparison from all prior years, so that you can see where we're at in 22 compared to prior years. This was not to replace it. This is just a separate report that I keep up with.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Crystal. Did you have another?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. First thing, I thank you for that internal graph you just showed. I thought that two interesting comments or points were what Virginia pointed out, which was the COVID shutdown in April, how low it went, and then, of course, now the climbs and the peaks above normal numbers. Obviously, we've got inflation higher, so costs go up, but I think that was interesting to see. And now going back to the original Todd's comment of removing the first 3 years or starting at 100,000, is that something the committee would be interested in doing? I see some heads nodding yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Put it on the record.
Dr. Windsor
yes.
putting it on the record. All right. Is there maybe a motion to ask that we have that chart start at 100 million, or to have them, Virginia staff, whoever, look at removing the first 3 years into some sort of cohesive table?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, there's a motion and a second, so now we'll have discussion. Todd?
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify that, so for moving forward, rather than setting a dollar amount, is that the chart would reflect the current year and the 2 prior years.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. That sounds good. Anyone else have any other discussion on that? Okay, any public comment on that? All right, so go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, sounds good. Yes.
I just do have one separate related question. So you showed the graph and that we're seeing some spikes, and I think Vinny's comment's good that with inflationary increases, that's going to drive revenue, will drive costs too. But so I assume that's then reflective. We're using the state projections, so ultimately that should be reflected. The state's going to be adjusting their projections that should reflect some of what we're observing, so that we have this data as a decent planning tool moving forward as we review projects and know about available funds. And
Correct. We look at the state's revenue projection, and that's on the graph as well, but then we do our own projection. The state's projection is based on their tax structure, and our collections have been a little different. One thing is purchases over $5,000 are exempt from the half cent. And so, and there's some other differences. So we have reasons that our revenues don't track exactly the same as the state's, but we show you our projection as well as the state's projection and take that into account.
yeah, I guess, but the point being, do we feel like it's a messy time, right? Is this influencing how we're planning on what we have available? We're using this from a trending standpoint, I assume, to help get a better understanding as we look at available funds.
Right. So it's in that sort of October, November timeframe that it gets really important to do our best at fine-tuning those projections. When the new collection of project funding requests comes to the committee to get an idea of how many dollars are available. And so by that time, we should have several more months of revenue. We should be into this current wobble and see how that's affecting the state's collections and projections as well as our own.
And I know one thing, and then Crystal, I'll let you add on it. Terry, I know you've got your hand raised, but Crystal may have an answer to Todd as well. As Virginia said, I don't know if you all remember, when we do the plan update or the project update, I know Virginia and her staff are always good at looking at that inflation number and adding in monies to make sure that we're not going to leave ourselves painted into a corner. So I know yearly, that's one of those conversations that Virginia always brings to us, and I'm very thankful for. As I'm not very agile, so getting painted into a corner would be a problem. So, Crystal, did you want to add something to that conversation? If not, we'll go to Terry. And Todd, if you have another comment.
So when we pull up the EDR, it's located, on the web, and it's a chart that we pull that has all the counties in Florida. And we pull up Brevard, and that's that straight line green on the original first graph. However, it doesn't get updated through the year. So that straight line graph from them is just that, a straight line and a snapshot in the beginning of the year.
Okay, thank you. Terry?
Yeah, Vinny. So we don't have Crystal's internal chart that she showed that had the drop in revenue that Virginia highlighted. But it doesn't show up on the summary charts that are in the package. I'm just curious why, if there was this lag in collections, that I can't see the chart that you showed before, Crystal, but you showed this drop in in the previous years. It doesn't show up in our straight line thing. I wonder why that is.
I can actually answer that because right here, this drop, this is because this is an overlay that you're comparing from year to year to year. And our straight line, which is here, let's see. We collected so much that we were only, I believe, 200,000 or 300,000 in the overall below our projection. So although we had a slight drop, which looked quite significant here, the overall, if you look at the rest of the year, it's still slightly above prior years. And so it shows a deep drop here, but it doesn't show as a large drop in the grand straight line plan.
And I think, Terry, if you...
Does that help?
Yes, Crystal. And I think, Terry, if you looked at the height difference, the slope between 2 points at the same month each year, you'd be able to see one of the years the slope kind of evens out a little bit. I mean, we're talking, the amount isn't that big when we're looking at a graph to Todd's original point that goes from 0 to $300 million. If it was condensed, we'd see that slope a little bit more exaggerated. But that's just the month to month. So you'd have to compare the slope between 2 months in that big graph. Sorry for getting technical. I almost went some stoichiometry, but that's a little too much for today. No stoichiometry.
Yeah. My recommendation is for Crystal to keep that chart for internal consumption only.
Okay. Thank you, Terry. All righty. Any other comments on the financials? Okay. So let's go ahead and go to the other reports and special presentations. We'll go ahead and have the outreach, story maps, and newsletter. Brandon?
While Brandon pulls that up, I will just add to Todd Swindle's comment. Even though the state economic development, whatever EDR report, they only do that annually, the Florida Chamber of Commerce has an economist on staff who does some really impressive work. And so that's another resource that is updated monthly that we check.
And just from your comments and the observation that if it was really even during that COVID shutdown was only off by that percentage, then it maybe becomes irrelevant if the source is just so stable that it's, we're probably more subject to the cost side inflation being a bigger factor than, so we need to put our energies where they make the most impact.
All right, all about being efficient.
All right. So I put a QR code up on the screen if anyone wants to check out the new story map and follow along. We'll pull it up on here as well, but I'll give you a second to scan that if anyone needs to. And so the new story map that we were working on gives some general information on the program, but also gives sort of our progress as we go along that we'll be able to update. So sort of a consolidation of the general info on the SORL program plus our monthly reports, or at least quarterly. So nice videos on the, when you open it up on the splash section there. So it's a story map format, and it's done scrolling, so you can tab to the different sections at the top here, or you can scroll down throughout if you want to read all of it. So we keep up with the completed projects that we report on quarterly, put that in a few different graphical formats for people to digest, and look at the excess nutrient pollution that we're removing. We get those financials in there as well, so showing what's been spent and collected and the projected in there. We've also added a section in for grants, so we can keep adding to that as we get more grants. And then we talk about the nutrient pollution based on the different categories that we're working on. So you'll see a breakdown of what's been removed by the various categories with septic and sewer, sewer upgrade, plant upgrades, stormwater. All right, we get into the derelict vessel removal, which we give you guys each month as well. Talk about the progress of the oyster restoration and planted shorelines. And we'll probably have to add something on clams in there soon. So. And get into the grant programs as well, so people can see how we're progressing as far as the grants we've given out, and there's links at the bottom of each section for them to contact us about the grants if they're looking to get something done in their own property. And we break down the pollution sources. A couple different formats there. And talk about our adaptive management, the monitoring and other things that we do. And links to some of our other story maps, and we're working on an FAQ section, flushing that out. That'll be added in there. And there'll be a, few other story maps might be in the future where we go more in detail in each of the different categories. So if someone wants to learn more about stormwater, we can go, they can click on something and go there.
All right.
So that is the new story map that we shared it at the Straight Talk, and it's gotten a lot of visitation from there. That's the only place we've shared it so far, so we'll be putting out some other links on social media now that we've shared it with you guys, and we'll be tracking those to see how we do performance-wise in the different outlets.
All right, thank you. Laura Lee?
I think the story maps are wonderful, and I'm telling people all the time, go to this website and look at the story maps. How often do they get updated?
So some of the things will be updated on a quarterly basis as we get in those quarterly progress reports. There's a few things in there that might be done monthly, just, like the derelict boat vessels, stuff like that. We can change on a monthly basis as we do the progress reports here.
Okay, yeah, because it's a tremendous amount of stuff to keep up with. I don't know how you guys do it. But they're amazing. Thank you.
All right.
Anyone else have any other questions? David?
I was just going to make a comment. That's really well done. It really puts us from I'd say a D in communications to a solid, B. Like, it was like, wow, that's, I think, one of the biggest failures of this organization since I was introduced to it was the inability to convey to the public or average person the massive scope of how much is being done in so many different tracks, in so many critical areas. And this is much more accessible than any of the documents online. I think continuing to be able to get this developed and out there is something that people can easily see is really huge.
Yeah,
It's-
we shared it with the cities at our city meeting yesterday and encouraged them to help us push it out there as well. So it's a tool for them to use whenever they get questions in, they can direct people to it.
It's really great work. Thanks.
Todd?
Yeah, only other thing, just, again, I think it's great. It's very engaging, very well done. If somewhere in there you could perhaps either have the link or some of the data for some of the activities so that people can get involved. I didn't see that in there. Just, if it's too much to clutter it up with those activities, if you just have a little section of a get involved, you can push them over to the,
Yeah.
the website location. Because I feel like this is going to be something that people might actually kind of engage with as a recurring tool. So that way it'd be a good place to make that connectivity over to other ways to get involved.
Yeah, so our volunteer opportunities are coming up in the next section here.
Yeah.
So we also have our newsletter that we're putting out. So this will be our first newsletter going out this month. This is going to be, done in conjunction with our monthly progress reports. So we'll highlight a few items out of those progress reports. We'll highlight maybe a video that we've done, completed recently and posted. And then, this month will be on our smoke testing program that Virginia was just talking about. And we have one of our LID projects at the Cove, that video highlighted. And then we put the volunteer opportunities in the newsletter so people can go take a look at them, but it shouldn't be a problem too to also maybe integrate those into the story map if we're doing them for one and we can do them for the other. And, drive people to Lagoon Loyal for things that they can do in their own home, even if they can't get out to the volunteer events. And we'll use some infographics just to give a little bit of the progress, and then we have the links to that story map and our website if they want to delve deeper in there. So that's our standard format we're proposing for the newsletter. If there's, suggestions on other things you would like to see in there, let us know.
My only comments, I think that connectivity is good, so don't feel like you got to put all of this over in the story map if it clutters it up. Just, maybe it's just a simple little section that pushes you off to the get involved piece so that you're not trying to replicate everything everywhere. But that people have different entry points that they like, and the more that you make it easy to go everywhere they might want, then you'll get better hit rates.
For everybody that's engaged by the story map, you want to provide a link to them for how they can
an
get
easy
involved,
way to
how they can
connect,
help.
so-
Yeah, we definitely want to make that link.
Dr. Windsor?
Yeah, I think what you've done is great. I want to offer a suggestion, maybe if you can pull it off. If you can't pull it off, I understand. I have a long history of trying to engage people in the public about scientific issues. It goes back to 1969 is when I started doing that sort of thing. I've pretty much been unsuccessful in about 99% of everything I've tried. And I'm having a hard time coming up with what the 1% success is. I'm trying to give myself just a little bit of credit. But, the story book or the story map idea, everybody I've heard talking about how great it is are people who are tech savvy and are into looking at things online a lot. And particularly the people who develop these kinds of things, like talking to other people who develop these kinds of things and work in these communities. And I'm concerned about the people that we're trying to get are the Uber driver that David was talking about 2 months ago, who didn't know anything about the lagoon and and was suggesting that this was an abysmal educational failure. I disagree with 2 months ago that it was an abysmal educational. I disagree that 2 years ago it was an abysmal educational failure. I just don't think we're hitting the right people all the time. So my suggestion is there any way to test market this with a group of people who know nothing about the lagoon and don't have any interest in the lagoon? And I'm not sure where you get those. Maybe somebody at IFAS can help you out. Maybe some of those folks can grab a test population and see if, the old advice that was given to me with websites, if you can't grab somebody's interest in 2 clicks, then they're going to turn off. And I think that still holds today. Probably it's 1 click today. And I'm not sure the first click about going into the background, what this is about, is going to grab them. Maybe the video will, I don't know. So my concern is we're hitting the population that we don't need to worry about. We need to hit the population that's not getting the message. And unfortunately, most of your statistics will probably come from people who already have the message, unless you somehow figure out a population that is not a Lagoon loyal member, is not a member of an advocacy group of some sort. So if you can pull that up, that'd be great. If you can't, I understand. Just a suggestion.
Susan?
Thanks. But great work. This is great work.
First of all, Brandon, great work. Second, what John was saying, there has to be a way for polling, because I know they do that with political, when they target people, they'll do a survey, and it could be like $3,000 or $4,000, and they'll say, okay, I have a neighbor who's considered, they call him a super voter, and she had no idea what some of the local elected officials did, but she votes. So I'm not sure how much it would be for like a poll to just, the average person and ask them, because a lot of people, when I talk to daily, they have no idea. And I have a friend who lives on Tropical Trail on the river, and she doesn't really know what we do until I direct her to this, and she's like, oh, that's great. So I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
All right. And for those out watching in Zoom land or on Facebook or YouTube, they can sign up now with the link right there. So this takes them to a page where we can collect their email information so we can get the newsletter out to them. So I'll leave that up there for a minute if anyone wants to scan that and sign up today to get the newsletter.
And while Brandon leaves that up for a moment, we have done those polls in prior years. We've done them in-house. We've done them with consultants and volunteers. We've done them in consultation with the IFAS Extension, Holly Abiel. So we didn't do that this last year, but we can work on how to do that again now that we have some new things to test on the audience.
Susan, and then Laura Lee.
Like I live here in Vieira, and I know when the new people, a lot of my neighbors are from out of state. They've come from the New England area in California, and they have no idea about the lagoon. And I know Eva Ray at the Vieira company, she'll do I think a monthly presentation for new homeowners. So maybe something like that, just kind of maybe do a presentation, or have Virginia or somebody go, or Todd or Benny.
Wow. So only if Todd goes with me. All right, Laura Lee.
So I assume that the newsletters are going to be archived on our natural resources website?
No, we will not be putting them on the
No.
website because they are not ADA compliant.
Ah, okay.
So in order to get a nice, pretty newsletter, we had to get permission to use Constant Contact. If we did it through the county's website and were able to archive it, it would just be pretty much a plain text, email without any pretty graphics and other
Right,
things.
okay, so that's why our website itself is so kind of plain looking then, without a lot of movies and graphics and, okay. So, so the newsletters won't be archived, or accessible then, but could we, when you make the newsletter and you send it out, I'd suggest sending it out to all of the environmental organizations, like Sierra Club and Marine Resources Council, and, as many as you can think of, and ask them to forward it to their membership. So you would at least be getting what we're doing out to the choir, and then maybe they could share it with some of their neighbors and people that don't sing that much.
Thank you. Todd?
Yeah, just, I appreciate Dr. Windsor's comments because I think, I guess I look at it slightly different in that, for me, it's, the real challenge is that you have something like that, and I think once you get someone there, there's a good chance that they'll look at it. And there'll be varied hit rates. I think our biggest challenge is even getting them to see it in the first place and getting them connected there. Because unless they're out there looking for it, or we have a way to connect with individuals, then we're just, I suspect we're just missing the vast majority of the population. So that connectivity is, at least where I've seen historically, that's the big gap. So that would be the place I'd encourage if there's other ways we can figure out. I like the comment about, all the new homeowners moving in, things like, can we have a one-page insert with the QR code on the utility bills? There's a lot of people that either move or move in, and they've got to go apply for a utility account. And so if there's any way to, that kind of thing, where if there's something where we can connect with folks, that there is a significant portion of the population that is doing that activity, if we can think through some ways like that, again, you're probably not going to be handing out these materials. That'd be too cost prohibitive, but a little one-page insert that you're moving into Brevard County. We encourage you to get involved, and the Lagoon's one of our most important features. Check out this QR code for how you can, something that is simple, cost-effective, but helps make that initial connection so that we have even if our hit rate stays at 20%, now it's 20% of 5 times the number of people. So it's
Yeah, and with Constant Contact, we can generate different sign-up pages with links so we can track each method that we're targeting people, and we can see how many people came from, say, a community outreach event versus if we put an ad out online, or so we'll be able to track all those.
The reality is all these utilities, most of them are municipal utilities, and they're getting money from Sorrel for other aspects of their projects. So I would hope we would be able to get pretty ready cooperation on that.
We've done that before with the Melbourne utility a number of times, and it has been cost effective. So that's a good idea. Another opportunity we have is all of the county's public libraries. We can do something like a bookmark, and they'll be on the counter with the checkout materials and reach a different segment of the community that way.
And schools. School's the other one, getting kids to go home and annoy their parents.
Yeah, we've our stormwater program is currently contracting with the school board to post giant poster things on the fences in front of the schools. That's a new thing now, so we're going to give that a try too.
Oh, hold on, David. Terry's had his hand up, and then you. Terry, go ahead.
Yeah, Brandon, thanks. I've been trying to follow along with my phone. I use the QR code, but I don't get a URL that I can translate to another browser. It gives me storymaps.parkgis.com, and that takes me to a site that I have to log into. So if I want to tell somebody to go to this site and I don't have the QR code to give them, what do I tell them?
For the story map, I'll have to get with Becky. That was the URL that she had provided to me, so I thought that was the one that was active.
Oh, it works. It works. It just, I don't know if you've tested this with other browsers. Safari browser on my...
Well, and so that was going to be my question, Brandon. Is there any way to get to the story map without the QR code?
We'll have it on our website as well.
Okay, so there will be a link on the Sorrel website?
Yep.
That'll get to that story map. And what about signing up for the newsletter?
That's also going to be on the website.
Okay, so there'll be links on our website to get to those. Okay, when those links are up, could we also go over that at a future meeting?
Yeah, they should
Two?
be up by next week. We should have
Okay.
them
I
live
just-
on there.
If we could go through the process, I know some people love to be able to see the process. David, did you have a question?
I was just thinking it'd be great to have those things on some sort of little poster or whatever that you could put in front of schools or places. I mean, the feedback I'd love to get is high school students, and others, clicking on that and collecting some of that data. But if you could just put those in front of some of the public schools where kids will click that to see what it is, it'd be a great way to get some information out there.
Okay, Stephanie, and then Susan. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Also, Brevard Public Schools could ask better to their parents, and potentially we could ask for this QR code and about how to access information about the Indian River.
You're breaking up a little bit, Stephanie.
I know, I'm hearing real feedback.
Yeah, I can help with that. Hold on one second.
Okay, hold on 1 second, and we'll mute the computer here. Go ahead, Brandon.
I'm not sure how to mute when I'm screen sharing. Hold on.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
What I was saying is that Brevard Public Schools
Still not, hold on. I'm going to stop sharing. Now I can mute. There we go. She should be fine.
Go ahead.
You should be okay to go.
She can't hear us because we're muted.
I just unmuted, but go ahead, Stephanie.
Okay. Brevard Public Schools produces a newsletter that they send out to parents. And so potentially if we could get them to, publish something about the Indian River Lagoon, especially to new parents coming into the area, to let them know and give them the QR code to be able to access the newsletter.
All right, thank you. Susan?
What David was mentioning about the schools, two things. I had a friend, his son went to, I guess, Cocoa Beach High School, and I know they did the Oyster projects. Number one, is that at all the schools or was it just that one school? And then number two, like at Junior Achievement, I've done that in the past as well as Rolling Readers. Is there a way that we could become volunteers and then have somebody go to the different schools and talk about the lagoon?
So I know Junior Achievement, I think it was at the end of the last school year, did a presentation that they're going to try to start duplicating at other schools about the lagoon and science.
Okay.
So that's a great idea, which they've jumped on. So I think that's going to continue to happen. But the Oyster project one, that I don't know. Todd, did you have?
I used to be involved with Junior Achievement. There might be some really great opportunities there to connect the science and the importance of the lagoon with business and finances for this community too. I think that's a really intriguing potential collaboration because of the fact of how well some of what we're doing does tie in with their mission of financial awareness and financial sustainability and those things as well.
We did a day, it was in the spring with Junior Achievement. There was like 50 of us. We went to one of the schools, I think it was in Cocoa, Titusville area, and we went and we did the financial portion, but if you can incorporate both, I think that would be good. And the students were excited and it was fun. It's at an elementary school, so.
Anything that you can get fun for students, they eat it up. So that's the key word. Virginia?
And as I recall, Matt's cat Ernest stole the show this last year.
There is no
so,
lie.
yes.
After the presentation was over, people were coming up trying to get Matt's autographs just for his cat. I mean, maybe a little bit for what he said, but mostly for his cat. Laura Lee?
So I'm on the river a lot, collecting seagrass and water testing, and I talk to a ton of fishermen. I talk to fishermen all the time, and they're some of the biggest complainers about nothing's getting done, and the river, although it does look better this year than it has in a long time. But I just tell them about the story maps and tell them about our website, and it's pretty easy to tell them how to get there. I say, just go to brevardfl.gov and click on the manatee and click on the story maps. So you've made it easy to be able to tell people how to get here. But if you could put the word story in front of maps in your headers, and then I know the septic overlay, it just says septic overlay map, so if you want to make everything sync, you could put septic overlay story map, and that way all of the story maps are there. And then once you're trying to reach regular people, once you get the new story map done, and you could make like a rack, just a simple rack card, and that would have a little, description of all of the story maps and some of the other really important stuff that we do, and get it out into like the hardware stores, the Ace Hardwares, the 7-Elevens, the different restaurants. There's 1,000 restaurants in this county, and that's the places where regular, normal, non-techie people go. And I know at my restaurant, if I had a brochure like that, it would fly out the door. People want to know what's going on in the lagoon, but they don't know where to find the information. So just a simple, it's going to have a nice colorful picture on it so that people will look at it and see it. They'll pick it up and take it out, and then they may actually go to our website. Those are a couple of pretty simple suggestions, but I think a rack card in the right places, put it in the church vestibules, try to reach people that we're not reaching, and that's by going to the places where they go.
All right. Okay, so so Laura Lee, to your point, to everybody's point, I think there were a lot of points up here, although Dr. Windsor, 1%, that's cutting yourself short a little bit. I'd say you've affected at least 2% through osmosis, at least. Yeah, at least the low-fat milk amount, 2%. But I actually was going to do some research myself. I think, maybe it's time we look again at either working with Brandon and working with another company, or maybe looking again at our communication. We did have the work with MTN to work on Lagoon Loyal. Maybe we also look either re-engaging MTN to see if there is something more that we wanted to do, or look at another company or other options. I think, Laura Lee, you hit it, and Dr. Windsor was talking about it. There's a thing called idle time. And it's the most coveted amount of time in the marketing world of a person. It's when they're idle. And it's those moments that you can really capture somebody. And throughout our days, idle time becomes less and less. As soon as we get self-driving cars, we won't have any idle time because our employers will expect we work while our car is driving us where we need to go. So I think finding those idle times and then putting the documents in front of them, Dr. Windsor, to your point of finding people that aren't on the computer, that aren't amongst our choir already, might be a good idea. So, Virginia, I don't know, maybe we look this year at our plan update, and I'd love to get the committee's opinion on this. Maybe we look at spending some more, dollars on communication, on outreach. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a lot. We don't need to be reproducing the wheel. We've done such a great job, Brandon and the rest of the staff, with these story maps. They're great. We have these great tools. The problem is how do we reach these tools out to those that don't know about it? So it may not be a lot spent. And with that comment, I just want to say, I can't remember, somebody asked me a question. They were looking at our pie chart, and it says 0% spent on communication. And they kind of hit me back at that. You haven't spent anything on communication? I said, well, if you look at comparative to $542 million, we've spent less than 1%. With 1% of that, someone help me with the math, I think that's $5 million. So we've spent less than $5 million on communication. But I think maybe it is time that we relook up and see if there's some way that we want to spend some money on that. So maybe, what do you all think? Is that something we'd like to discuss maybe at a future meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, at the last plan update, one of my biggest notes to myself was, we're still spending way too little on education. And so depending whether that communication and outreach fits in education or effectiveness, effecting the plan, or however else you want to describe it, I think we should go back and re-examine the issue. Yes, definitely.
Todd?
And I agree with that, as long as it's with a purpose, that we need to have some targeted outcomes, whether it is support of the plan, whether it's support of the work that we're going to need to do to continue on with these efforts, whatever it is, that let's not just do education for the sake of education. Let's do it with a purpose, that we are seeking specific outcomes, and we've got objectives of what we're trying to communicate, what we're trying to engage, what we're trying to educate, and why, what we are hoping to achieve.
Susan?
And I agree with Todd on that. And there's a lot of people in this community that have a lot of talents, social media and knowing how to do all Facebook posts and that. So maybe get a volunteer so we don't have to pay. Because I know I was at a function a couple of weeks ago at a luncheon, and some people were complaining. They're like, well, why is it spent on education? Why aren't we fixing the projects? So maybe if we can get somebody to, like Todd, for example, what if you knew how to do social media and David knew how to do polls, and get people to volunteer to the education that Dr. Windsor was saying, so we're not having to spend money.
Okay. The one thing I would say on that, I know if we are going to be goal and target orientated, like in other words, we want to reach 100,000 people. We want to set a goal. Sometimes it's hard to have a volunteer do that. As somebody who volunteered their time at the beginning of this to design the website, we are all so busy, and I find most of the people in the community that are good at a task are very busy. But I think these are great conversations to have if you all feel we should have them, at a future meeting. And Lou, I know you got your hand up as an attendee, but we may vote on this, and if we do, then we will ask for public comments, but I'm not sure we were going to vote or have a motion on this. I'm not necessarily sure we need one for a future agenda item. All right. Okay. Well, then I think we're good. Brandon, thank you very much for the presentation. And then Virginia, again, if we could, find some time in a future agenda to talk about that before the project plan update. So Lou, I'll call on you in the public comment if you just want to hold your comment until then. All right. So the next item is our Oyster. Like a New Yorker way of saying it. Our Oyster material testing with Dr. Hansen.
Hi. All right. Thank you, guys, for giving me the opportunity to update you on this project. This was a 1.5-year-long study that we conducted on looking at alternative materials for our oyster restoration projects. As you all know, we started doing oyster restoration back in 2014, and it was a long road. We were building off of successes that had been in Mosquito Lagoon with the University of Central Florida, Brevard Zoo, the Nature Conservancy, but we faced different issues here. They were looking a lot at trying to restore intertidal reefs that had significant issues with boat wakes. We found a completely different suite of issues here with our shoreline type, recruitment limitation, and sediment dynamics. And so we've learned as we've gone. We've had great successes. Majority of our projects are now meeting our success criteria. So it's sort of time to look to that next phase, and that next phase turned out, in this case, to be other material types that we might be able to use. So some of the benefits of our oyster bars, again, most of us are quite familiar with this, but these are keystone species for our lagoon. They're ecosystem engineers, so they build a structure that benefits the whole habitat. It creates a habitat for other organisms to live in. Another great example of this that comes up a lot are beavers. They build these dams that completely change the ecosystem and environment. And with them being a keystone species, it means that their absence significantly alters the ecosystem for other organisms. So we really want to be able to bring them back. They do have a historic presence throughout the Indian River Lagoon. Some of the services that they provide, they can improve water quality through filtration activity and by promoting nitrogen sequestration in their shells and tissues, as well as promoting denitrification where those excess nutrients are actually released back inertly into the atmosphere. They can stabilize the shoreline and sediment through their, by armoring the bottom, as well as attenuating wave energy. And they provide this amazing habitat. And one of the places where this is also very exciting is not only are we promoting the oyster reef habitat, but there are potential links to our seagrass habitats by reducing that turbidity directly with filtration, indirectly with wave attenuation, and improving the nutrient levels so that that internal natural cycling that occurs in both of these systems is more in balance. But one concern that's come up is with microplastics and plastics, is particularly in the marine ecosystems. And it's a bit early in understanding some of this, and one of the traditional methods in Florida has been to bind your shell culture material, the material that you need for oysters to settle on, in these essentially plastic mesh bags. They are UV stabilized, aquaculture grade when we do our projects, but still there is a bit of a concern that's been building over time with using them. And in fact, a recent study looked at, did a survey to try to look at how restoration practitioners are viewing their materials, and found that predominantly people are ready. They're thinking about the shift, even though it's early, even though we don't have a lot of data on what's best or how long it lasts. They're starting to pilot these projects and are excited and want to keep using them, as well as funding agencies starting to say that that's necessary, and permitting agencies encouraging the shift away from plastics. But they're more expensive, and they tend to be a little bit harder to deploy and build with and work with. So we wanted to really get at that with what's best and how long can it last, and how cost effective can we make it? So we designed a parse down study where we looked at a number of different material types that were done at about a 1/3 to 1/4 or 1/4 to 1/3 scale of our full size, so that we could do look at a lot of them and have those replicates that would be necessary. So the material types we chose that were available at the time, we have galvanized after welding stainless steel gabions. We chose 2 different mesh sizes. There's a little slight difference in cost between the mesh sizes. They're also, so the one is a 16 gauge gabion and one is a 14 gauge. But they also had a different opening size based on how the manufacturer makes them. So one was a 1 by 1 inch opening, and one was a 1 by 3 inch opening. So that was our metal test against our control, our traditional bag method. We also were using the core modules, which is the community oyster reef enhancement that was developed by the University of Florida Whitney Lab. They traditionally put 10 shells per small core in. These are all of the rest of the materials were a combination of natural material and concrete enhancement. So they use one form of concrete type, and generally had 10 shells. So we asked if we could also test putting more shells in there to improve rugosity, make it look a little bit more like a natural reef, and create more little spaces for critters to get into in settlement. And they were excited to try that. We also came up along the way, some scientists with the University of Florida IFAS Sea Grant agents developed these jute reinforced calcium sulfate aluminate, it's a very long name, plastic-free restoration of oyster shorelines, or oyster prisms. So these are being tested kind of all over the state. They had a grant to test them all around Florida. We have a few different projects that are starting to test them here now in Brevard County. So we did a parse down version of those as well. And using that calcium sulfate aluminate concrete, they found a better interaction with the pH. So it didn't alter natural pHs quite as high as some of the other concrete materials, and they're doing a lot of work to see that they're a little more carbon friendly in the development and construction. And then finally, Brevard Zoo, who helped with the design for the oyster gabions, also had this idea of these little oyster ball clusters where they would string jute material that was soaked in concrete through holes and shells to make a little ball. Unfortunately, you're not going to see anything else about those because the jute did not take the concrete very well. It immediately degraded, and they had really good initial recruitment and then completely fell apart. So they'll need additional testing to see if they may work for longer term projects. So the specific questions that we wanted to address were how long do these materials persist in the local environment? And how do they perform in relationship to fouling? So this is an example here in this picture of one of our pros units that unfortunately didn't make it, probably had not the best coating of the concrete, and water got into the jute material, so it sort of broke apart. We also wanted to then look at the biological side of how well did oysters recruit? Did they like these materials? So you can see a number of small oysters toward the upper right corner of that lower picture. And then finally, did they bridge and did they get outside of their structure? So this is important when we're doing a restoration project, that we want to create that full reef structure, bind these materials. So bridging is when one oyster settles on a shell, and then as it grows, it cements itself to an additional shell. So there's a circle there around an example of an oyster bridge. And then again, to really get that and cement these materials, they have to make it outside if they're bound in something. So in the bottom left, we can see where their oysters are just exploding out of this gabion at the end of our experiment. So our design, we had 3 locations that we chose. One was in the Banana River Lagoon, and 2 are in the Central Indian River Lagoon. Marina Isles and Riverview Senior are both locations where we have existing oyster bar projects. We did this so that we could sort of mitigate against any potential environmental issues that might arise. If we had a major storm that sent low salinity event out through Turkey Creek, kind of close to where the 2 Central Lagoon locations were, we thought maybe we would get lucky and have some recruitment at Marina Isle so we could still test, or vice versa. We tend to have a little lower recruitment in the northern section of the lagoon, so what if we had a bad recruitment year, which funny enough we kind of did, and didn't see very many. It would be very hard to determine what if it was the materials or just natural recruitment. So we needed to sort of diversify where we looked. We also needed to test, again, for structure and integrity as well as the biological side. So we designed 2 separate parallel experiments. The abiotic, what we'll call abiotic, is our structural side. So as we monitored those, we rinsed them, we weighed them, but we tried not to open them or disturb the development of the oyster community in that way, versus the biological test where in our gabions and our mesh bags, we actually open them. And that's semi-disturbing and destructive for the development of the reef. So this kind of let us look at 2 different things side by side by separating our test. We also deployed them at slightly different times. So we had a little more initial fouling on the abiotic test, and then we waited to deploy our biological until it was just the right moment for early recruitment. Each material was deployed in triplicate, so we could get statistical analysis. Also, if one breaks like we saw, it didn't mean that whole material was out. We could still keep looking at the ones that were left. So this is sort of that importance of controls in our experiment, and the importance of doing things in triplicate. So we had convergence of data, statistical analysis that could be made by having multiple materials. So in this case, each material type of those 7, we had 3 deployed for the abiotic test and 3 deployed for the biological test at each of the 3 locations. So it was a lot to look at. We generated quite a bit of data during this test. They were hung under the docks at these 3 locations, and because they weren't on the bottom, we wanted to make sure that we were capturing any differences. So because those 2 locations where we have our control reefs, we were able to compare what was happening in our natural constructed location, but established oyster reef, so that if we saw what we did, things we didn't expect, we could contextualize it with those years of data that we had from monitoring those locations. It also meant that we could compare our results to what would happen if they were deployed on the bottom, in case raising them off the bottom had an effect. The upper right corner are our depth profiles that show the differences between the sites. So the furthest down to the south is the furthest kind of towards you, since it's a semi-3-dimensional figure that looks like a capital T, is our Riverview Senior location. The middle one that looks like a lowercase t was the dock at Castaway Coves, and then the 2 side-by-side that are just lines are from Riverview from Marina Isles, we had 2 docks that we worked with. And the darker colors just means it was a little bit deeper. So a little bit of a different gradation between our 3 sites. So how did we actually quantify these metrics to answer our questions? So we looked at the structural integrity by determining the percent cover of fouling, deformation of the material, any breakage that was observed, and corrosion for those metal materials, for the gabions. There's an example on the upper left of how we would do percent cover. So we assigned a score based on a range of percentage as to what we were observing that went from 1, it actually went from 1 to 7. I showed the first 6 here. So 7 is just above 95% cover. So each of those variables were noted. We also weighed these materials, and then we would rinse them to remove fouling that was easily removable, like detritus and algae that might compete with oyster settlement, to try to quantify how much is actually happening with these different materials. Because we had 3 different locations and because oysters respond to environmental cues, we needed to know what was happening environmentally as well. So we took continuous water depth, which is what that middle picture is our little pressure sensor after being out in the field for a couple months. And then every time we went out, we measured the salinity, the water temperature, and the pH, both under the dock and over by the shoreline where our restored reef was, so that we had an idea if there was differences between our control and our test. And then when we get into our biological test set, we're looking at things specifically related to our oyster population. So density being the number of oysters on any given material, and then looking at their size classes. So for the enclosed materials, the gabions and the bags, we actually empty those completely and census every shell that's inside. We look first on what's on the outside and then census everything on the inside. And then as we're doing that, the first 50 that we come across of oysters, we also measure them using calipers, and that gives us a distribution of sizes. And for oysters, this is really important. They are sequential hermaphrodites, so they start as male, and as they grow, they become female. So if we want a reproductive, sustainable population, you need to have new recruits coming in to replace mortality. You need mid-grade sizes, so you have some males and some really large ones, so that hopefully you have some females. And then with our species richness, this is just a count of any other observed species that we had. Took note of all of those, and if they happen to be likely to be competitors or predators, we also took abundance for a lot of those species. So that sort of helps us get a snapshot of how these populations were developing on the different materials. Like I said, we censused inside for the ones that we could. For things like cores and prisms, that's not possible. So those, we looked only at the outside of the material, but then all of the data that I will show here, we normalized by what I'm calling essentially the settlement surface area. So how much space there really was that we looked at in monitoring so that we could normalize for those differences to compare between material types. So some results. This is just to give the background of how our environment looked. The bottom 2 figures toward the left are salinity and then temperature over time at each of our locations, both at the control near, along the shoreline position over the oyster bars, and then also under the dock right where we had our materials deployed. There's really, really tightly coupled. There was no significant differences. In fact, I think there was only 3 instances in 54 data points where we were beyond 5% difference between those environmental parameters. So we were really capturing the same environment, which was great for our control. And we also know that oysters respond to salinity, such as this tendency to look for a lower salinity if you're subtidal because you don't get relief from pressure, from predation pressures, and if by not being intertidal, they instead look for release in the salinity range. So we did see that as you see that little spike about half a year after deployment in our salinities, just after that we started to see boring sponge appear, which would be expected. At the locations where salinity stayed a little higher, sponge stayed a little longer. So when we start to think about mortality and how well sponge gets onto these different material types, this is one part of looking at that. We also know that temperature impacts oysters' ability to grow and recruit and spawn, and so luckily, about 60% of the time, we were well within ranges that we have targeted for oyster restoration and very, very tightly coupled. And we've seen this during other analysis of data across the lagoon. The temperature tends to be pretty tightly coupled between different locations. And finally, we know that we face some significant challenges with depth. Because we're microtidal but have strong seasonal swings, the depth of the water column can have a really big impact if we have oyster bars very close to shore. So we wanted to try to capture that and see how different these different locations were. So the three lines in the two plots to the right are the continuous depth measurement for each of our locations. There was a difference in depth overall, but we did hang them similarly spaced to the as reference to the bottom. So they were all sort of in the same position to the bottom, but would have different amount of water column above them when we did our test. And then to zoom in, I just thought it was really interesting to see we are microtidal, and it's very well shown here. You see those strong changes over the year. We had about a 2-foot swing in our water depth, but day to day we have these very, very tiny 5 to 10 centimeter shifts that are likely due to something beyond just atmospheric pressure changes. So that was really fun to see in this data, and hope to dig into it a little bit more as we keep working with it. Just to give an idea of how these really looked, here's an example of each of the material types. I didn't put all of them up because they look a lot similar and pretty much just look like dirty oysters, but we have our Naltex bags, then our thicker gauge gabion, our higher shell density cores, and then our prisms moving from left to right. And from top to bottom, we progress in time. So in the very early stages, after 4 months, you can see there is some additional initial fouling. There's some algae sticking off of them, starting to see encrusting bryozoans and barnacles, other filter feeding organisms, but not necessarily oysters yet. When we get to about 10 months, they're little, you can't really see them very well in this image, but there are oysters starting to settle. This is the abiotic test set. So they did actually eventually get some oysters settling on them, even with initial fouling. And by 16 months toward the very end of our material, our test, you can see them exploding out of the bags, really thick density of good-sized oysters there in the gabions and on every material, honestly. It's a little hard to see because they're small pictures, but there are lots of oysters on each one of these. And a huge diversity of organisms, even the fouling community. So I can try to point out a few maybe. There's an oyster kind of sticking off over here. There's some here. These are all healthy live oysters in this area. This entire surface is live. All this sticking out of the bag, these are all live oysters. So it kind of goes to show that in these natural environments, they may look not phenomenal, but there's a lot of life, and that's just the nature of these reefs. So for our abiotic test, looking at damage and fouling, how long did these persist in the environment? So this is the result just from that test. We had a few additional losses in the biological side, but funny enough, our control, our standard, was the least successful in terms of staying solid in our environment. So we had 5 bags. The loss here is that they were so broken they couldn't really continue to be a part of the experiment. So we lost 5 bags over the 3 locations, starting at about 9 or 10 months after deployment. Our first loss was at 6 months. It was one of our prisms that I showed that picture of. And then we had one of our finer gauged gabions that also was so corroded that it wasn't going to hold shell well anymore. Another way that we looked at this was, again, that percent cover of fouling. So all of the materials within the first month to 3 months had about 75% cover of something. For us, fouling in this case was either algae, detritus, or any of those encrusting organisms like barnacles and bryozoans and tube worms that just kind of get on there and compete for space. But when we look at the fouling removed, that's really just focused on the softer stuff, the detritus and the algae. So on the left, we have a fouling weight removed at each time step. So this just shows how much accumulated over time that was able to be removed by looking at the change in weight and then normalizing by the volume of the material so that we could compare between these different sort of sizes of materials. And then on the right, we have a cumulative value instead. We added that weight back in, looked at the total change because we measured before and after removal at every time step. And so you see a little more fluctuation in that. You'll see some of them are negative or go up and down, and that's because the whole community structure was changing, whether there was growth, new recruitment, maybe some mortality, just differences in the community structure, invertebrates that could swim in and out and move around. So that's why some of it goes up and down. But for the most part, from both of these, what I wanted the take home to be is the cores, both core types, noted as CH and CL here, had slightly higher fouling overall than any of the other materials, even though you wouldn't necessarily think so because they weren't enclosed, didn't have a lot of volume, but they did have greater overall fouling by weight. So then looking at our biological side, our oyster density, we had the greatest density of oysters in our bags and gabions. The figure here shows that normalized density at the 3 different locations. The diamonds and squares and circles, which are sort of the green and yellow lines that tend to raise separate and higher than the lower lines that don't have a lot of variability in them. So those are our mesh materials, gabions and bags, and down below are the prisms and the 2 types of cores. So there really was a pretty distinct difference, even after normalizing for those monitoring types between densities, with higher densities found in the mesh materials. Also, where things were more recruitment limited, like Marina Isles, really interesting that density was higher, and we'll see too that recruitment was sooner in those types. And then finally, what I did for density is we looked at everything on the abiotic at the very end. We counted how much had gotten outside the footprint and on the biological test set, because remember, they were set out about 3 months apart from one another. And funny enough, the biological set, though younger, had higher recruitment. So some of that initial fouling may have played a little bit of a part in how they grew. But they did, they were similar toward the end. They caught up with one another. So even though it happened faster on the biological material, they were similar after a year, which I thought was kind of interesting. So in some ways, whenever you deploy, you have a good chance of getting oysters in these materials. So how did they grow? There were some differences between the materials. A lot of this is not statistically significant, but there are some pretty obvious differences when you look at the graphs. So wanting to highlight this one location, this is Riverview Senior, where we have really, really high recruitment. This on the y-axis is the frequency of occurrence by size class. So the sizes of oysters that we measured were broken down into 10-centimeter bins, and then how many we noticed in each one of those bins was counted, and then we divided by the total number that we saw. So we have a percentage of time of different sizes, or percentage of occurrence of different sizes. So at the beginning, as you move from left to right, we go through time. At the beginning, we saw the recruitment happen, and then you start to see the non-mesh materials sort of pull ahead in terms of growth. The oysters that are present are bigger. So there's more smaller ones in the mesh materials and more larger ones by percentage in the exposed materials. And then toward the end, they all sort of catch up again. So it didn't really matter where you started. They all grew to a good size in the end, but we did see those kind of differences as they developed, which may indicate that different locations, if they're facing different stresses, maybe you want to use different types of materials to kind of capture that. So the bags and the gabions had slower growth. And then also, though not shown in the figure here, our bridging counts, we found that it was a little bit earlier in the gabions and the bags, but greater number on the exposed materials, on the cores, of creating that reef structure. Some of that could be because they were disturbed. As we opened them and broke them apart, it would interrupt that ability to grow the bridges. So some of that may be an artifact of how we monitor. And again, though not here, it was really cool to see is at Marina Isles, where we have lower recruitment, we saw everything coming into the gabions first. So interesting additional note that getting inside the mesh early on when recruitment was limited, and then eventually as we saw more and more recruits, we started to see them coming into the other material. So there was kind of a preference for being inside that caged material, it seems like, at least at some locations. So in conclusion, our densities between our locations was between our controls and our test, we saw a much higher density in our test than we did on the control. And I think this is probably because it was new material. That clean shell is bringing, those new recruits are sort of swamping to that clean shell, and so that might be a part of what's being seen here. But the suite of organisms that was found on the control reef and up in the water column was very similar. So we do think we were well capturing the dynamics, just a little bit of difference being that it was higher in the water column and new material. When we normalized all of our density, again, we saw that pretty distinct difference between our gabions and bags versus our cores or prisms. And that when we looked at the mesh size and mesh opening, so the gauge of the wire and how open it was, the finer gauge material did have a higher density than the thicker gauge, which also had, the higher gauge also had that smaller opening size. But then it also had higher mortality, fouling, and damage. So when you start to compare overall for building a reef, you didn't see, it wasn't statistically different, so you didn't see an appreciable difference in recruitment that would mean let's go with the finer gauge. For getting a longevity out of the material, it seems like the heavier gauge is probably the way to go out of all of what we found for a lot of spots. But again, there's some interesting things we could delve into deeper as to which locations might be best for which materials. We also saw that those with the larger mesh opening had higher emergence and bridging. So building of the reef structure happened a little bit better in the bigger opening, whether it was actually completely external or even in the two different gabions when we compared them. With our two different core shell densities, we saw a slightly better recruitment and I think slightly better recruitment and lower damage on the higher density cores, but it came with higher fouling and lower bridging, and a little bit lower, a little bit higher mortality. So not statistically different, but some benefits to bumping up the number of shells in those cores if we were to use them in the future. So as we started these projects, like I said, we learned a lot along the way. Some additional places we can look at is whether or not we need to put fewer shells in. I think some of the reason that the gabions were slower to grow is because there was so much shell. And as we started to pilot these with Brevard Zoo on the bottom, they're using a little less shell. So, and they are seeing that when we compare a gabion reef to a bagged reef side by side, they're getting higher recruitment and faster growth in the gabions than they were in the bag. So it's very similar to what we saw in this controlled study, and also sort of points toward that fewer shells may have less limitation of space and maybe a better way to go for narrowing it down to those two materials. Also, as we continue, we want to keep testing these different materials on the bottom because there is likely some difference in having them up off the bottom that we saw in this test, and looking at those site-specific designs. And then the really exciting part for me is looking into ecosystem coupling. So maybe one of our future next steps as we all start talking about seagrass restoration is how these systems may work together in places where they can be located together. Just like we saw with designing these early oyster projects, we learned a lot along the way. We're gonna face unique challenges and unique circumstances with moving into the next restoration type, moving into seagrass. So designing these projects, having strong questions, strong experimental design, we know that early on there's gonna be high risk, but over time, if we design it well, if we're really methodical about our monitoring, we hope to improve our success. Chesapeake Bay and Tampa Bay have started doing, they have a long history of doing seagrass restoration, and even their survival of seagrasses may only be 30 to 50%. So it's going to be really important that we're building that knowledge and accumulating that knowledge as we go and know that we have that high inherent early risk, but that we can learn as we move through. So I think that's it for me. I just want to acknowledge that this was a huge effort, and lots of partners worked on development, design, helping me build materials, being covered in cement or out on the water for a whole week straight, sunburned and filthy dirty. So I appreciate all the effort that went into it and the funding from all of you here at Sorrel, as well as the National Estuary Program.
All right. Thank you, Jenny. Questions, Laura Lee? Dr. Laura Lee? No.
So at the beginning of the presentation, you showed a picture that had a red mangrove with the roots going down in the water and then the oyster thing next to it. Are you seeing recruitment on the red mangrove roots too, around where you've got these, the restoration things?
Yeah, we do have recruitment on mangrove props. You see them kind of all over the lagoon where there's recruitment. You may see scarring on the, or even new oysters on mangrove roots. So it does. I think there was a great old story about, they used to say around the IRL that the oysters literally grow on trees, because beyond the fact that we have a different species of oysters that's called a tree oyster, they also will recruit right to the mangrove roots.
And then I was really intrigued with your oyster ball and was disappointed that it didn't survive to be tested. But have you thought about using wire through the holes to hold them together?
Yeah, that could be another way of doing it if you can get a good gauge of wire to move through, or possibly even just improving how they soak the jute. It was just a little hard to work with.
Yeah, I mean, because they resemble the way that oysters naturally used to occur in the river more than any other thing that I've seen. Thank you. That's a great presentation.
Thank you. Sorry, I ran over time.
That's okay. I like the fact you like the oyster balls, because that to me sounded like something might be at your restaurant, Laura Lee. Like, no lie, but I do think I would definitely eat some oyster balls. Dr. Winter.
Yeah, that was great. I enjoyed the presentation very much, Jenny. So right now, if you didn't go any farther, based on your results so far and your knowledge of costs of materials, what would you recommend be the go-to first?
Heavy question.
Thanks.
The gabions here are performing quite well, and from that study I sort of briefly mentioned, they're similarly priced to something like the pros units. So anything is more expensive than the bags. So we're just hoping, another exciting way we're doing it is as we're testing on the bottom, we're starting to play with how much gabion material do you really need. So one idea the zoo came up with was, can we build an exterior barrier of gabion, fill it with a bunch of shell in the middle, and then put the upper layer on top to minimize the amount of metal material was needed. We're also testing corrals where we just put a slightly taller gabion in a single layer around the outside, fill it with oyster shell in the middle, so that it creates more of that natural mounded oyster. So we're looking at ways to cut cost with the gabion material, because that did seem to be very successful in our waters. Now, those pros units are phenomenal in Cedar Key. I mean, they just get covered immediately. That's where they were developed. They have great recruitment. They're really well solidified with oysters. And depends on your project type. They also are looking very promising in terms of creating wave breaks. So if you're looking for a more economic way to do a wave break, they're awesome. They seem like a really promising option. So it all depends on what you're trying to do. But I think for us here right now, we're going to keep delving into gabions for a little while and see how that's going.
Okay, thanks. Keep up the great work.
Susan.
I had a question. Well, first of all, thanks for the great presentation. I was with a group of people probably about 6 weeks ago. We went to the zoo and we helped build, there was about 20 of us that did the oyster gabions. And you had mentioned a little bit ago about I think it was Tampa Bay and Chesapeake, about the seagrass. What was for this year in 2022, what's the amount for monitoring the seagrass? Do you happen to know? Because we talked about that at the zoo. It was like on a Saturday about 6 weeks ago.
You mean how expensive is it to monitor?
To monitor the seagrass for the 2022 this year.
You mean how much have we spent?
How much has Sorrel spent on it?
To monitor, yeah.
Sorrel has not expended anything yet for monitoring seagrass.
They had mentioned something about FIT had volunteers, so I didn't know if it was an FIT or a Sorrel, so.
Yeah, it's the zoo, from my knowledge, has received other private funding to start some seagrass pilots, completely outside of Sorrel, and so they're gearing up that project. It hasn't even been planned. The majority of them have not been planted yet. I know they've done some seagrass plantings, but I'm not sure if it's the same project or another parallel project. But again, none of those have Sorrel funding at this point.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I just want to add to that. So the committee authorized us to look at funding some, helping with seagrass monitoring costs. So step one has been to develop this guidance tool to look at where are the lowest risk sites, and how do we maximize the chances of success based on what we know right now. So we're building this guidance tool. And then once we have that, we will be looking to all these other entities that are out there planting, right? Because the swirl planting is not cost effective in the world of the swirl plan. So we're looking to all those other entities that have funding from other sources that are going to be planting seagrass. If they are selecting sites that are consistent with our tool, and they are willing to set up their planting design in such a way, in a rigorous way, that allows us to answer, collect data and answer questions that we need to know about how to improve the success and lower the risk of planting, right? Then we would look at helping them with monitoring costs or helping them with the field work for the monitoring. So we expect to be moving into some monitoring costs, but we're not there yet, because the first thing is to try to assure that the investment is going to the right places and being done in a scientifically rigorous way, sort of like what Jenny's just illustrated for oysters, that we're planting, in triplicate or in a research design where we can get statistically significant answers to the questions that we need to know.
Thanks.
Okay. Stephanie?
Yes, thank you again for this presentation. It was very informative and really interesting. But my question is, obviously the plastic bags are performing better than anything else that you've studied. And so what is the major concern about using the plastics? Do you think that they're going to degrade over time and release plastics into the aquatic environment? Or is it just the idea that you're introducing plastics into the environment itself?
So the bags have had successes over time. It's a little bit hard to tell. They do periodically sort of break away. We won't know yet what's happening with, not significantly, but they do degrade a bit over time. They can be torn if they're not bound. So the idea with the plastic bags initially was that you'd get so much recruitment that plastic would be bound in the reef matrix. When you have slower recruitment or slower growth, that doesn't always happen. And so I think part of it is shifting toward a material that wouldn't be leaving a layer of plastic in the environment. And with in this particular case, they were similar, but I think the gabions still did outperform the bags for recruitment. Also, it's a little bit easier to build a taller reef, a more natural height with the gabions than it is with the bags. You'd have to add even more plastic to get the reef taller, and that could be why we're seeing some differences too with improvements with using the gabion material. So I think it's multifold why why so many people are trying to move away from the plastic. But yeah, there is concern that it could break and break loose. There is concern that it's just a layer of plastic in the environment, where some of these other materials are supposed to degrade into a more natural element over time, or be bound in a more natural way.
Okay. All right, any other questions? David?
One quick, a couple things. The boring sponge, is that a predatory on the oysters, I assume?
Yeah, I was just, it is considered a predator. I'm not sure that it directly eats the oyster tissue,
Yeah.
but it grows into the shell and weakens the shell over time. The oysters can die because they don't have a strong shell to protect them anymore.
Is there something that eats the boring sponge?
That's
Like
good
a fish that likes to eat it or something?
I don't know if there's anything that likes to eat boring sponge, but it is a natural part of our environment. It's just sort of trying to find the niches where you're not just going to get completely decimated by it.
Yeah.
It can't tolerate being out in the sunshine, so intertidal reefs don't have much of a problem with boring sponge. But for our subtidal reefs, it's an issue, and so that's why the salinity is so important. So if there's a freshwater bath from a tributary every now and then, that will really decimate the boring sponge and knock it back. So as long as you have a freshwater bath, every so often throughout the year, that seems to keep it in check.
Yeah, so where I'm at on the Banana River, with a lot of thorny conch, seems to be a huge problem. But I guess a question for you. So it's interesting the gabions and the bags did better than the prisms or core modules. Part of the issue, I think, in a lot of places are you've got to get these guys off the floor, off the bottom, due to sediment and everything else, which obviously the gabions have to be suspended or put up on something, right? There's not docks everywhere. I mean, how are your efforts here advising how Brevard Zoo and others that are going to deploy systems go about architecting things? Because you imagine, and the other thing I thought was interesting was I thought that the oysters would prefer something that had some calcium carbonate, like concrete in them, to nucleate on. So it was really interesting to see that you're getting much higher growth rates without any calcium carbonate substrate, no concrete needed or shell needed, and they're going wild there. But how is this? Are your results advising the way that they're going to perhaps do future deployments and figure out maybe you do some concrete, then put gabions on top of that, or?
Yeah, so we do play around with design a lot for on the bottom test. And the only reason this was off the bottom was honestly just sort of ease and timeline related, that we decided to test it in this smaller scale, very, almost like creating a wild lab environment rather than building a whole bar out of them. Again, that helps with the cost effectiveness too. So the idea is that they would be just on the bottom for an actual construction project. We've tried some cores, and like you said, sedimentation was a huge issue, and we actually found that they were only about 7.5% the density when we normalized between the cores and the adjacent mesh bags. And it was interesting to me that was kind of mimicked even off the bottom. So where I thought it was purely just sedimentation on the bottom that was messing, kind of creating enough difficulty, we still saw lower recruitment even when we got some of that pressure relieved. They still had more fouling even when we got some of that pressure relieved. So yeah, it does definitely interplay with how we're designing and building projects with the zoo. And we had this test to look really in detail, but we also use our monitoring task order with the University of Central Florida to address questions as we try new design. So if we think, oh, maybe this is, now that we've done this, maybe we think this is the way to go, we then have UCF come in and do monitoring of them at full scale.
Stacking is the
Yeah, so we stack, so thank you. So the bags or gabions, you lay a layer down of one layer down, and then you stack a second layer like a pyramid on top of it. The prisms are already taller, so you just do a single one, although they have discussed where you could possibly do one and another and then flip one over to make like a trapezoid and then set another layer on top if you were in deeper water maybe or worried about subsidence. So they have a lot of creative ideas of what to do with those. And I think the point about that you might need concrete, calcium carbonate is part of the natural buffering system of salt water. So it's available as long as pH doesn't get too out of control. And oysters, because they're an aggregate reef-forming species, they prefer to settle on their own shells. So where you have lots and lots of recruitment and no shells, you'll see lots of oysters on concrete or rock. But if they have shells available, it seems to be that they will go to the shells.
Okay. Just two final thoughts. I know the Banana River really needs some oysters to start growing. I've tried without success, but with the help from Clint here. I was just going through and it seems like places where they're growing naturally can be expanded out maybe, or places to start. I was going through the lock at Port Canaveral, there's natural oysters growing all along the concrete base of the lock. Obviously, there's a lot of flux there, but maybe outward of the lock on the Manhattan River side might be a great place if we ever look for places.
I appreciate hearing that you've seen them there, because we're always asking and looking for, like, where have you seen them? We know where they were before, where are people seeing them now? So it's exciting to hear that you've seen them up there. The zoo has started to do some recruitment studies to see where they get oysters to set, just on little shells that they deploy all over the lagoon. So we're starting to focus, like, where are they now? When we started this, we barely had oysters, I think, in Central Lagoon. Like, there just wasn't a lot. And as we've built and as time has gone by, we're starting to see that recovery. And we're hoping that we're moving the bar north over time, that we're sort of capitalizing on where we currently have oysters and hoping that that pushes further and further north by building those populations up, that we get breeding populations that might spread. So we're hopeful that eventually we'll make it up there. At least the Marina Isles is at that southern end of the banana.
Yeah.
And we've started doing some projects directly across the waterway from there as well. So time will tell, but. Coming at it from the top. Yeah, it would be really, yeah, if we can find a population up there and start moving our way south, that would also be incredible.
Heather may know the answer to this, but I think the Florida law changes recently keep you from teaching us about sequestering hermaphrodites in public forums, so you gotta watch out for that.
Had to throw that out there. It's one of the best fun facts about oysters.
Okay.
That's all.
All right, well, ending on that one. Any other comments or questions? Okay, I had just one. I think that this, what you just presented, Jenny, thank you for that, is an example of having a 10-year fund and focusing on a solution. We know the oysters filter water, but we don't know the best way to do it yet or to build it. And our lagoon is different, although there are similar issues to Chesapeake Bay and Tampa Bay. And so I think when you can focus, David, you know, when you build a prototype in the entrepreneurship, you build something and it may not be efficient. It may be sloppy, the code may be terrible, but it's working. And so I think, as you stated, we know oysters are working. The question is how do we get them to work better or work best? And I think this is an example of that. And so that list of partners that you have on there, again, is an example of what this half-cent sales tax is all about. So I think this is a huge success. We're writing the book on Indian River Lagoon oysters with hard facts and data. So thank you, Jenny, for that, and everyone else that was involved. With that, I think let's take a short break. How about 7.5 minutes? That'd be 7.5 minutes, and then we'll come back and see some more presentations. Thank you. All right. All right, so here we go. That was a little more than 7.5 minutes. It was 8 minutes on the dot. So we'll go ahead and go with our next presentation, which is we're going to have a derelict vessel removal and a separate 2022 Lagoon water clarity conditions video. So Brandon, take it away.
So we're going to swap the viewing of those around, so we'll show you the water clarity first. But we had been getting a lot of reports on how great the water was looking from all sorts of people, so we wanted to try to document that. And unfortunately, by the time we got the video crew scheduled, the rains had started the week before they were going to go out, so it's not as clear as it was prior to the week that they were filming, but we still got some good clear water shots. So we had them go out and film at various spots throughout the lagoon, starting at the north down to the south. And you'll see the little dot on the map in the video showing where they were out filming. So, and their other big challenge was trying to find access where they could fly their drone publicly from the shoreline and still be able to see it. So we'll get started with that first one. All right, so any comments on the first video?
Yeah, thank you. Comments from anybody? Okay. I had one, it's great. Is it shot in 4K, first off? Because that's how you can really show it off. No, I'm joking, partially, but I don't know if it's already in the can. I think it would be great if we had somebody talk about water clarity or something in the beginning or middle or the end. Not because it's beautiful, it's startling, but I think if this video just played and I didn't know where the link came from or spent the time on the link, if we had somebody talking a little bit about the clarity, why it's important, how we get there, that might be a good idea, because the music is nice, but again, the visuals are there. This might be some more of that idle time where we could spend doing some education. Todd, did you have?
Yeah, I agree with that, but a word of caution also, that as, you know, we're happy to see it clear, but this is a journey, and every time, you know, and the public and the masses tend to live in the moment, and so the reality is when you even mentioned we have rains and it's going to, you know, degrade and then come back, and we're in cycles. My hope is that those cycles are constantly improving. You know, and if there's anything that we can talk about longer term trends, you know, for instance, is, you know, when we're in dry periods, is the clarity during the dry periods changing? Is the clarity during the similar wet conditions changing? Because it's, as we start to see where under similar conditions that we're actually seeing improvement, for me, that's where we then really have a story to tell. Because I get fearful when we start to highlight, you know, clarity and it's been nice and dry, because the reality is it's transient. And so I don't want to put a damper on it. And if we truly have that success and we're starting to see it, wonderful. But I think we've got to temper this in the context of a long-term journey.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. Well said. Anyone else? All right. Brandon, we'll go ahead and look at our second video,
All right.
the derelict boat removal. Oh, Virginia?
If I may. So that was part of why we did not do a voiceover explaining it. We really weren't sure, you know, how to characterize this. We don't want to, you know, overplay the moment. But the truth is that we have these significant chunks of time between blooms, and you can see the bottom, and you can see acres and acres of caulerpa that is stabilizing the bottom. And so, you know, as we start on this new process, embarking on seagrass restoration, yeah, the conditions may not be good for seagrass to grow and expand and never contract, and it will never have a bloom again, but we have significant chunks of time, you know, a year and a half between major blooms over the last 5-6 year period, where, you know, that gap, that's long enough for seagrasses to grow, expand their rhizomes, you know, coalesce different clumps, stabilize the bottom. We learn about a lot of the things. Jenny mentioned, you know, what is the best size planting unit? What is the best spacing? Which are the species? Is it better to do it with an oyster wave break, with clams incorporated? So we can take advantage of these chunks of time when the water clarity is good. Of course, we don't have a crystal ball to know when the next bloom is going to, so there will be some unfortunate misses with that. But hopefully, you know, as we keep going forward, we will capture enough of these clear water windows when we can use that time to collect the information that we need for larger scale restoration of seagrasses later.
See right there, that voiceover, done, in the can, Virginia. No, I think it's a great point. We don't want to, you know, overplay it, but I think also having, like Todd's point, the longevity of it. It's a great video. I just think something tiny would be good. Maybe Matt's cat. I just had an idea of Matt's talking cat, somebody animating its mouth. Would be amazing. All right.
Deep fake technology.
Yeah. Well, they had it in Mr. Ed. What was that? Hello, I'm Mr. Ed.
Today we're at the O'Galley Boat Ramp, and we're here to talk about derelict vessels. A derelict vessel is a vessel that has been left or abandoned on the waters of the state in a wrecked, substantially dismantled, or junked condition. Most of the ones that we run into are in wrecked condition, meaning they are either sunk or hard aground on a shoreline requiring mechanical assistance for removal. It is a misdemeanor crime in the state of Florida to have a derelict vessel. And the process to remove one once it becomes derelict is pretty involved. We conduct our investigation, declaring it derelict. We have to get a hold of the owner in some way, whether it is in person, through telephone, or even mail, notify them that they have a derelict vessel. And once they are notified, it starts a 21-day count. And at the end of that 21 days, if they have not petitioned for an administrative hearing on the classification of their boat, we can then move for removing it. So once that 21-day count's up, I can get a removal letter prepped and sent to the county, and then the county will work on applying for grant money or using their own funding to get a contractor out here to remove it.
There's funding available from Florida Fish and Wildlife and also from the Florida Inland Navigation District, recently from the Tourism Development Council also to remove these boats. So they've become our partners, and I chase that money yearly to try to keep the stockpile on our waterways down to a minimum.
Over the last 10 years, we've at least removed over 80 boats. At any stake whatsoever, we always remove the engines and fuel first, and any other oil containers, anything that could be hazardous to the water. We have this big turbidity curtain that's around the boat. It stops any debris from floating away from the boat. So any debris that will sink or float will stay within inside that turbidity curtain. Our main goal is to get every single piece into a dumpster. We try not to leave anything behind whatsoever.
The challenges we currently face on declaring boats derelict are whether or not they meet the statutory definition for being derelict. When it's wrecked, it's pretty easy because it's either hard aground somewhere or it's sunk. But when you start talking about the other definitions of being substantially dismantled or junked, substantially dismantled means it's missing 2 out of the 3 requirements for functionality of a vessel. Does it have propulsion? Does it have steerage? And does the hull have good integrity? Just because a boat looks like junk doesn't mean it fits the junked definition.
Derelict vessels are a hazard to lagoon health in a number of ways. So when a vessel sinks, they can oftentimes be loaded with fuel, they have marine batteries, there may be refrigerators and other food supplies on board due to people that have been living on these boats. So when they sink, all those become pollutants in our waterways, so there can be sheen on the water, a lot of other problems associated with pollution. Additionally, when a boat sinks, it can impact seagrasses or mangroves along the shoreline. In many instances, we've come to remove boats, and it's obvious that these boats have eroded the lagoon bottom where grasses are present in the perimeter, but as you get closer to these boats, the grasses are gone, or they may be up in the mangroves, and they're destroying mangrove plants. In addition to the environmental hazards posed by these vessels, safety hazards, public safety hazards are a big concern. They're a hazard for boating safety, so anybody out there in a jet ski or somebody oftentimes come in early in the morning or late at night, they're going out fishing, they may not see some boat sunk in the water or just below the surface or a mast, and they can cause an accident. So it's important, that's something to pay attention to, and it's a reason why we're removing these vessels from the water in the first place.
Derelict vessels are completely avoidable if the owner takes care of the boat. In very rare instances, does the boat just sink or become derelict. Usually it's an ongoing process where the boat just decays on the waterway and gets to that point.
As a good boater should be aware, there's a lot of little things that an owner can do to keep their boat from sinking. A lot of these boats sink because their anchor line erodes away. So they have an anchor line that's as big as my pinky instead of something that's an inch in diameter holding a huge boat. I'd also like to remind people that the importance of shoring your boat up during hurricane season. When a hurricane season is approaching, it's important that you shore your vessel up and account for the high winds and high waters that will be associated with these storms as they pass through. Oftentimes, vessels may need not just 1, but 2 or 3 anchors to sufficiently moor them as a storm event comes. Storms can sink as many as 40 boats at once, so we wouldn't want your boat to be one of those 40 or more we see sink during a hurricane event. It's important also that you note that your batteries on board are fully charged so that your bilge works correctly. Last thing you want is a trickle of water to sink your vessel when a bilge pump with a good battery could have saved your boat from sinking. Those are some simple items that a savvy boat owner can take care of and prevent these boats from sinking in the first place.
All right. Thank you. Anyone have any questions or comments? Stephanie? I mean, Susan? Sorry, Susan.
Brandon, that was a great presentation. I was on the Marine Advisory Board, and, that was a discussion. How much is the average cost to remove a boat? One of those.
Our contract is by the foot, and so it really depends on, the size and weight and build of the boat. But most of our boats cost $6,000 to $10,000 to remove. The bigger boats can be much more expensive than that. The state recently awarded funding to Florida FWC to come in with a larger marine contractor and remove 10 or 12 of the largest derelict vessels in the county. So they're going to take care of some of those big boats so that Matt can focus our contractor on the smaller, less expensive ones.
Now, is it, for example, if I had a boat, I think it would be my responsibility. Are we allowed to bill the owners? And then use that, we should be using the money for the lagoon, and it's their fault for the boat, or is that a state or county issue?
The state rules, they do, like he said, they identify from who the owner is. They send notification to the owner, give them 21 days to respond whether they want their boat or not.
Right.
They do pursue the removal cost, trying to get that back from the owners. Multiple owners are not able to be found or don't have the finances. That's why the boat's in the state that it's in. We've had one not too long ago where the owner was in jail. So we have an account where the dollars that are collected, they're allowed to do monthly payments. All of those dollars go back into the derelict vessel fund that funds the removal of future vessels. And that is a state rule that it goes back into the derelict vessel fund.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Any other questions? Dr. Windsor, please.
Yeah, it was another great video. Matt's done a great job, as Natural Resources has, in garnering funds to support this program over the years. It's been going on for quite a while. Just to be clear, the Save Our Indian River Lagoon tax funds do not go to this program at all.
No, they do not.
Am I correct? Yes. Thank you.
Correct.
All right. And I just had one comment, Virginia. I don't know if they're, and maybe I should, I just, again, I think it's part of the education part. Is there a way where somebody could turn in their boat if they feel that it is going to be derelict soon?
Yes. So that is a recent rule change, trying to make it easier for people to turn in their votes before they sink, because it's way easier to pull them out on a trailer and take them to the dump than have to get a marine contractor and a barge and a dumpster out there. So yes, that program now exists. And
If I was that person, how would I, do we know how?
I don't know that off the
Okay.
tip of my tongue, but we can get that information.
Maybe next month when we do the derelict
Yeah.
vessel report. Laura Lee, do you know?
Oh, I had lunch with Tom Reiner yesterday, and he's like the South Florida Regional Director for FWC, and I think it's an FWC. I think you contact FWC, and they will be glad to help you get rid of your boat.
Okay.
They'll cover all the costs for taking it to the dump and everything.
Yeah.
But I don't know the exact number, but I think it's an FWC program.
I'm a big fan of being proactive. Maybe, Virginia, since we do report the numbers, although we don't spend any of the dollars, as Dr. Windsor pointed out, maybe we could have that accessible or on our website. So if I wanted to click somewhere and turn my boat over, we could turn it over.
Yeah, that's great. And I know Commissioner Smith had worked hard to support and help encourage that language change
Yeah.
at the state level. So
Great. Okay. Maybe Laura Lee and I can have a little boat fleet we'll start of boats that need some work. I could spend some time outside working on a boat. All right. Thank you, Brandon, for that. So we will go to the next item on the agenda, which is the 2023 plan update schedule. Virginia?
Yeah, so agenda item 9A is a proposed schedule. This sort of, follows the similar schedule to prior years. So today, we have proposed cost share eligibility rates as the next agenda item. If those are recommended today, they will get posted into the online funding applications that will go live August 1st. And then those applications, so the application cycle will be open from August 1st through September 30th. So September 30th would be the application due date. Staff would then review all those applications for completeness and make sure the calculations of the load reduction benefits follow all the guidance adopted in the plan that's consistent with the state rules for DEP, BMAP, TMDL credits. And then we would we would send you the packets to review in advance of your November meeting. So November, I know today's meeting was a challenging getting a quorum. So in terms of really important meetings of the year and important votes in the year, that November meeting is when we bring the project list and we talk about the economy and our projections of revenue and where we think we're headed. We do the best we can with the crystal ball and get your recommendation on what projects to incorporate into the next draft update to the plan. So then if you are able to make a final decision in November, we then take those recommendations and work over the next month to incorporate those into a draft plan, which we get to you targeted date, roughly when you would normally have your December meeting, but instead of having a meeting, we give you a giant homework assignment of a plan to review. And then in January, that plan would be on your January meeting agenda for a recommendation to the county commission. The recommended plan has to be posted for 15 days for public comment and review prior to it going to the county commission. And so that would allow us to take it to the county commission either February 7th or 14th, depending on how busy the board's agenda is and what looks like a better date.
Okay. So that's the proposed schedule. I think in the past, we have done a motion to accept
Yes.
that and approve that.
Yes,
and
we would
so-
like a motion to approve the proposed schedule.
Go ahead
or
and look.
amend
So
the
moved.
proposed.
Okay, Dr. Windsor with a motion. Is there a second? Second. Okay, Laura Lee, second. All right, any discussion here on the committee? I think that's good, other than you're missing my birthday in October, so if we can add that to the schedule. No, I'm joking. All right, no comment here. Any public comment on the schedule? And I know we have an attendee who raised their hand. I'm not sure. I know it was before this motion item, but I want to make sure, is it Danielle? Do you keep your hand up if you'd like to speak on this item? If not, then I'll call on you during public comment. Okay. Thank you. I'll call on you on public comment. But so it looks like we've got no public discussion on the proposed schedule. So we'll go ahead and vote for it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
All right. We're good. All right. So thank you, Virginia. I think that schedule mirrors what we've done in the past. It looks like we'll have another successful and exciting fall. All right, and you mentioned Crystal Ball, and her name is Crystal, so I think you nailed the pun there, but you didn't say no pun intended, so I'm not sure that really counts. Anyways, we'll go to the 2023 cost share eligibility by project type.
Okay, thank you. So this, in August July, right? We ask you about cost share rates that you want us to include in those applications for people submitting cost share proposals. And so where we start is we go to the executive summary of the currently adopted plan, and we look at the average cost of all of the approved projects in the plan. And offer that as a starting position. So if someone comes in with a project at that average cost, then that means it's going to be more cost-effective than the most expensive or least cost-effective project in the plan. Or if everything's the same, it's at least equal to other things in the plan. So if you need to swap things out and approve something that's ready to, a new project that's ready to go now, and take out an old project that just doesn't seem to be moving along, that's how we ensure that the changes are in a cost-effective direction. But then, so that's the column that's labeled 22 plan average cost per pound. Then in the far right column, the 2023 proposed maximum, there are some differences between that column and what's in the average in the adopted plan. And so those are highlighted in the bullets in the agenda. So for septic to sewer projects, sewer extension projects, the board some years ago approved a rate of $1,500 per pound. And so this would continue that practice of offering $1,500 a pound for septic to sewer projects. The septic upgrades, that also that increased to $1,200 a pound with board approval a couple cycles ago. Actually, I think that was just in the 2022 plan update. Then for vegetation harvesting, last year, you'll recall, there was about $1 million project funded for Melbourne Tillman to do a large-scale vegetation harvesting. That project was extremely cost-effective, and so it was driving down the average cost in the plan. Other folks doing more typical scale projects would not be able to be that cost-effective. And so the $110 rate is what has been approved in the past, and it was the prior average. So we've put that in this proposal for your consideration, is to leave that one at 110. And then for stormwater treatment, several years back, the Water Management District proposed the M1 Crane Creek rediversion project. It's a very large project. I think their latest cost estimate is around $18 million. The plan is funding $2 million of that. And so in terms of the plan costs, that project is really driving down that average again. So the $350 average is sorry, the $175 the $175 average in the plan includes that large-scale M1 Crane Creek project. The numbers that we have here are more in keeping with the plan minus that project, and these regional costs, the $313 for the mainland, the $370 for Merritt Island, and the $446 for the beaches are the identical rates to last year's applications.
Okay, thank you. All right, so and is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Okay, motion to approve the cost share eligibility. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Laura Lee with the second. All right, so any discussion on the cost share? Todd, and then Susan.
Just a question, and I know, we made the decision and we've pushed a lot more money toward like septic to sewer and sewer conversions, but from an efficiency standpoint, they're still poor. Or do we see that we're limited on other projects that might, or is that limiting other projects that might move forward that are getting more bang for our buck? So stormwater and some things like that. Because, and there's other, when I start looking at, the remove and restore categories, those cause me some concern because, I don't know that I'd want to redirect money there because I do think the reduce in terms of a long-term sustainable approach is the right place to be investing. But it does, and particularly now with, there's a lot of state money available for septic to sewer conversions and other things. So that's the only thing that causes me pause is the amount of money that we're putting toward those and especially in light of some of the other funding sources that are now becoming available. I'm not opposed to it necessarily, but I do think it's important for us to at least understand and make sure that we are being thoughtful about whether that we really should be investing at that level.
So for the most part, each year, there, between project withdrawals and, project changes and new revenues, the committee has been able to recommend funding for all the other reduced project types that have come in. There, last year, there was a septic to sewer project that was reduced from full funding to just design funding in order to free up money to fund another septic to sewer, a smaller septic to sewer project, and do the design of another septic to sewer project. And there have been maybe a couple stormwater projects removed in order to substitute other stormwater and reduce projects, but for the most part, that balance has stayed. But that's, excuse me?
By and large, you don't feel like it's impacting
I think currently, you're right, to date, it has not, but that's definitely a question, in November to look at that balance. So it really depends on what comes in and how much funding is available where.
Yeah, so I'm supportive of leaving it in as a cap. I would just encourage us that as we start to develop our project mix and in your communications, make sure that any applying entities are pursuing these other funding sources as well, so that they're very aware that that might be a consideration in terms of ranking their projects, so that, and helping stretch our dollars farther. Because, to me, if someone comes in and they're with sewer and they're to, 1,000 or 1,200, but it's gotten expensive, but they've demonstrated that they truly have sought out those other sources and maximized those, then that puts it in a better light as well, to make sure that we are stretching those dollars as far as possible.
We recently looked at all of our septic sewer and stormwater project, things that had gone out to bid in the last year, and looked at, how were those actual low-cost bid costs compared to our cost estimates. We've seen about a 30% increase in construction costs. Obviously, what's proposed here is identical to last year, so it's not covering that 30% increase in cost. And of course, there was a wide range from 10% changes to over 100% increases in cost, but on average around 30%. During our annual meeting with all of the municipalities yesterday, we talked about that, and we talked about the fact that there are all these state grant programs, and that is how the county is meeting that differential. That is not in the swirl plan. We're actively pursuing grants for all of those projects to cover that delta in costs, and encouraging them to do the same, and making sure that they understand that, once they have been awarded dollars in the plan for their project, they can use those dollars as the local matching requirement for those state grant programs, because some of the municipalities weren't aware that they could count what they were thinking of as county dollars as their match. We're like, no, these are community dollars, and once it's assigned to your project,
You might just make
you
sure
go
that
leverage.
they're trying to encourage them in terms of their grant strategy, though, is to maximize their grant application. If it's a 50-50 match for that state grant,
Yeah,
make
don't
sure
just ask for 30%, double your money.
Exactly.
Or whatever.
Don't use it for the increment.
Yes.
Truly look at it as a 50-50 match, so that we're preserving soil dollars and using state dollars to the extent possible.
Correct.
So.
And the other tool that's available to all of us is that the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program has grant writers, basically on retainer. And so if you have a project and have identified an appropriate grant, but don't have the staff resources or could use help filling in those applications,
Nice.
then it's just a phone call to the National Estuary Program to get that assistance.
All right. And so Todd, just so I understand, and again, as this is something that we may have to deal with more in the future, if you were to look at any of those dollars, just in our process and raise them, is that kind of what you were saying we may need to do?
No, I'm not suggesting we raise them. I just look at, as an example, and we've said septic to sewer is important. We know that was a big discussion with the county commission, but, it's at $1,500. And when you look at the dollars we're spending, we've spent, $120 million, 2022 estimated cost, $120 million of those costs. So when you look at that, that investment, if for instance, there's, 30 million worth of stormwater projects that aren't getting done at, 350, the equivalent nitrogen removal's much more beneficial. And so I know we've got, there's a big focus on sewer because it's real. Septic tanks, we should get away from them, and improving reclaimed water quality, but there's some changes in legislation that already mandate that. So there's just a lot of moving pieces. So it's more just making sure that we're making sound decisions, and particularly from a financial standpoint, as other federal and state dollars are becoming available, that we're making sure that as we factor that in. I'd hate to see somebody walk in the door and say, yeah, I've got a septic tank project and it's $1,500, and yeah, I didn't bother to apply for the state funding that's readily available. That, to me, would be a big negative when we're comparing against other people that are doing their due diligence. So I don't have a problem with the maximums, but I do think we ought to factor in that, that credibility of folks using all the tools that are being put in the toolbox for them to use as we prioritize projects.
Okay, great. All right. Susan, yes.
Todd made one of the points about the priority of the spending. And my other question, under the remove project category for the muck removal, like Todd was saying, is a significant amount of money of the $108 million, and it's, I think, $520 for the removal. My question is, I was driving over the causeway the other day for the Grand Canal. Is that project meeting the metric removal for nitrogen? And if it's not, like on the subcontractors, like what's the status of the subcontractors if they're not fulfilling that?
They are currently exceeding the standards. So the contractor, the main contractor who's doing the dredging, they're on target removing the solids. They've been using a sequence of subcontractors for the what's listed here as treatment of muck interstitial water. And there have been a number of challenges. That's, of course, a whole new technology, a whole new idea to try to treat that water, to try to take what the wastewater industry has learned and the ability to treat water down to the AWT, the Advanced Wastewater Treatment Standard at a wastewater treatment plant. Try to take that technology and apply it in the dredge material management area setting. In a wastewater treatment plant, you have some variability, but a fairly steady stream of nutrient concentration. Relative to a dredging project where the dredge is moving from pockets of highly organic material to other pockets of more clay-like material, or with bits of sand mixed in, and so the incoming stream is just extremely variable. And so the technologies that have been developed for the wastewater use had larger challenges to try to replicate their ability to deal with a dredge material effluent stream. And they're having to do that on a very small footprint with another contractor and a dredge and all these moving things and out in the sunshine. It's different conditions. And so, and there's not prior examples, and contractually, there were not examples for the prime contractor to look towards for, how to adequately write a good contract between them and their sub. And so the contractor has been working through, with their subcontractors, a whole litany of issues. But the technology is working. They are meeting the effluent limits as stated in the contract. And in fact, the concentration of the inflow stream is higher than what we estimated it was going to be. So in terms of the plan here and what the nutrient removal effectiveness is and the cost, they are exceeding that because what they're removing is actually higher than what we previously estimated it would be.
All right. Okay, any other comments from the committee? I do have just two comments. I love the fact, or I think it's great that we've removed out outliers. I don't know how many people were in a class in college and there was somebody that just killed the curve. Somebody got 100% and everybody else was like, what? That's no fair. But I think that it's great that we're looking at the average without the outliers, giving people another opportunity, not necessarily saying we're going to pick these projects, but giving them an opportunity to submit their projects with a favorable light. And also, the two things I wanted to point out, one obviously was the vegetation harvesting. That's something that we as a committee have been working on for a while. None of us here, I think, likes the fact that there's any spraying going on, and we'd love to have mechanical harvesting all the time, everywhere. So I think the fact that we're bringing that back up to the maximum is great to encourage that mechanical harvesting. And then the other thing I just wanted to point out was the septic system removal. I remember when we came back, when the commission sent the plan back, and we relooked at it, and we tried to set a level at which we thought we'd be able to be efficient with our dollars, and we came up with 1,500. It's great to see that our average is below that, because if you do compare, the pound per nitrogen, that one may have not been the most efficient, but the fact that we're able to be efficient in that category, I think is a great sign and a great use of tax dollars. So, all right, with that, we'll take public comment. Sandra?
Sandra Sullivan, South Patrick Shores. So my concern is we have projects that get awarded based on their expected performance in removing nitrogen, and then in actuality, some of the projects in the past and some of the projects currently are not performing to the performance that they expected. So it would be great to have a meeting where all the projects are listed and what they are actually performing at. Per the story map, we're supposed to be reducing nitrogen on muck projects by 28%, and according to that there, it's $520 per pound. Since muck represents a big piece of the pie chart for the Lagoon tax, it seems, in the case of the Grand Canal, that's probably the showcase project for the Lagoon program. When you look at that project, this is the second contractor that has been let go. And because not meeting the metrics of what is supposed to be removed. And from what I understand, they're saying it's just unrealistic goal there. And so it's really important in business and in government to have that accountability, transparency and accountability to review and put those projects down. And if we need to adjust the funding pie chart accordingly, if the reality of a project, it doesn't deliver what we expect it to, then things obviously need to be reprioritized. So I'm glad that was brought up, but it highlights the process that we need to do this across all projects and maybe have a meeting dedicated to reviewing the projects and what they're actually delivering. And then, of course, to see the levels the same under beaches and whatnot. With inflation, that's obviously not going to stay. So, I think those projections probably need to be revised based on the costs going up. Thank you.
Okay. So Virginia, we don't have projects that are not delivering, right? Isn't it in the contract?
We do not monitor the performance of every single project, right? We monitor a subsample of the projects. For the Grand Canal, they're now on their third subcontractor. The first subcontractor was meeting the nitrogen targets. They were not meeting the phosphorus targets. They argued that their contract didn't include phosphorus, and that was a dispute between the prime contractor and the subcontractor, and so they could not negotiate to, a peaceful conclusion, and so they were let go, and another subcontractor was brought in. The second subcontractor there's a startup period where, right, you don't just like flip the switch and it works perfectly day one. So there's a startup period. They did get to the point where they were meeting the targets. There's also, you're not going to meet the target every single day. You're going to have good days and bad days. They were meeting the performance targets for quite some period of time, and then for several weeks they were not. At that point, they were terminated, and a third subcontractor has been brought on. That third subcontractor is performing. So, when I say they are performing, they are meeting the targets, that is, across the board over the life of the project, for the most part, they are meeting the targets. And our contractor that the county has an agreement with, he is doing what he is supposed to do. And when his subs are not performing, he is handling that through his contractual means. It doesn't mean that every single day they are meeting exactly what the effluent targets are.
Okay, thank you for that. Todd?
Let me just say, as far as all the other projects in the plan, we monitor a subset of them. There's a whole chapter in the plan that talks about the results of that and the performance of those projects, and that is incorporated into the annual update process, and we do discuss those, just like you had the talk today from Dr. Jenny Hansen about the performance of these different oyster materials. You get the UCF monthly report on the performance of those oyster reefs. So we are measuring the performance of a subset of projects. We've talked to you about the performance of a subset of stormwater projects in the past. And so, that information is taken into account in the plan update process.
Okay, great. Todd?
And just to clarify too, though, the significant portion of the mass removal is from the muck, not from the interstitial water. So if we're talking about the overall targeted removal, then, it's really in a couple different buckets, right? So do we have a sense for, as my suspicion would be, if the majority of the mass is in the muck itself, that even if do we have a good handle on where we're actually at, from a metric standpoint? Because it seems like, there's going to be a lot of variability in the muck because you're making an estimate, and it is what it is, right? You're taking out that volume, but then, do we have an understanding of how those two pieces merge together and how substantive the interstitial is? Because that was a piece that got added by the committee as an added benefit of, while we got this stuff on the shore, let's not put it back in if we can.
Right. So because the organic content of the muck is higher than what was in the original estimates, both the solids removal is performing better than what we expected, right? They're moving more nutrients in those solids. It also means that there's a higher nutrient concentration in that pore water. And so if the performance standard is the AWT concentration, the 3 milligrams per liter of nitrogen and 0.075 for phosphorus, if you're starting at an even higher concentration, but you're still hitting the same target extra, that performance is also better than what was projected in here.
So what I'm hearing from you is that data might substantiate that the actual cost per pound, based on real data, is as high, is actually that we're
is
achieving a
better.
more cost-effective removal.
Right,
That
based
might
on
be-
that one project.
That might be
So-
helpful to show, though, just because, that's, to show some of that variability, because I think that is some of the, this isn't a controlled lab environment, so if there, we truly have this mass that's coming out and then that pore water treatment is being effective, and so we may even be at higher percent removals than anticipated, but it's that original target, so that may be helpful just to show, so, because it sounds like that when you look at the dollars per pound that it's coming down.
All right, so we're at 2 hours and 59 minutes. Is there a motion?
Motion to extend the meeting by 20 minutes?
Yeah, 20, okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Well, second, but I have to leave before 20 minutes. I have to go sign some papers down.
All right, we'll try to get you out in
All
19
right,
minutes.
thank you.
Laura Lee. Okay, is there any discussion? Public comment? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so we got 20 minutes extension. Okay, so any other questions on this? Okay, so I just want one other comment, Virginia. It sounds like the contractor is doing what I would consider a good contractor. They have a standard. They've now gone through 3 people to try to meet and maintain that standard. And so I know how hard it is to find people and keep people, so that sounds like the contractor is doing what we'd like them to do. So kudos to that contractor. All right. Let's go ahead and look at, so we got to take the motion. We got to take a vote. We have to do the vote. There's a motion on the floor. All right. All those in favor of approving the cost share, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
All right. So now we will go to the last item on the agenda, which is, I'm sorry, we had an additional item added. So we will go to the Cove Condominium Sewer Connection Funding Request. Virginia, do you want to give it an overview, or Heather, or you want?
So we received an email that was meant for the committee that we forwarded to the committee from a Mr. Ron Bachhold about the Cove condominium that's located down in the South Beaches, and a long history of their desire to connect to sewer. The county's wastewater treatment plant in the South Beaches, there is a Coastal Barrier Resource Act area between the location of the wastewater treatment plant and this condominium. And there have been questions through time about whether the county was allowed to run a sewer line through that Cobra area to service areas of the South Beaches south of the Cobra zone. There have been several interpretations that is now allowed. There is also a requirement in the funding grant for the wastewater treatment plant. There was a large funding grant from EPA that the service area could not be extended south of 6th Street in the South Beaches, and the Cove condominium is south of that. So in order to consider this request, let me back up. So first of all, right, this is a packaged treatment plant wanting to connect to sewer. You've done this. It's in the plan. It's very similar to the Oak Point Mobile Home Park. It was a private application that came in. They filled out the application based on the nutrient load reduction. They were approved for a certain amount of money. It partially funded their project. They are putting in the delta. They are managing the project. They have their own engineer, their own contractor. So that is the process that the Cove condominium could follow if they wanted to, completely consistent with what's already considered and done in the plan. But this has the extra hurdle of the county has this historical agreement with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency that we not extend service south of 6th Street. So we would need to get an interpretation from the federal government that that condition no longer applies, or that this location could be an exception to that. And so if you want us to work, if you want staff to work with Mr. Bachhold on completing an application, a funding application, and you want us to begin the process of coordinating with EPA to see whether they would allow this contrary to the current agreement, then we could start those wheels in motion.
Okay, so what is the committee's desire? Dr. Windsor?
I'd recommend that we go ahead and let staff initiate discussion and move forward with this.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
I second.
Okay. Any discussion on the committee? Okay. I've got one comment, Virginia. I would like to see, I think yes, let's have them do it as a project. We can rate it pound per, or dollars per nitrogen like all our other projects, see how it fits in. The one thing that I would probably ask is if we are going to reach out to the EPA about this, if there are any other areas in the county where EPA funding has stopped us from running a sewer line. And the only reason that I'm saying that is because I think if we're going to have this discussion, it may behoove us to have this discussion elsewhere. I think we all believe that septic tanks are probably not the best thing to have, but there are advanced ways to handle it. So maybe if we could see if there's any other areas that are prohibiting us from running sewer lines, so we have that conversation now.
I can talk to our utilities, right? Every plant has a separate history, and I don't know how easy it will be to know what all of the stipulations are on each of those different facilities. So if we want to move this one forward in time for this application cycle, I think we need to, and we could certainly ask the question, for all of the South Beaches, for all of this South Beaches wastewater treatment plant, but to expand that question to all of the other wastewater treatment plants, all the other federal grant agreements in the
That makes sense.
30, 40-year history of wastewater treatment plants in the county, that's a much larger assignment.
Okay. I think thinking big picture, like you said, all South Beaches might be good, and then maybe even letting wastewater know that, this is something we're looking to do in case they want to continue that conversation elsewhere. Okay, is there any public comment on this? All right, so we'll go ahead and take a vote on the motion. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
All right. So now we will go to our final agenda item, which is the letter that was sent about the reimbursement. And I think we have a presentation, if I'm not mistaken, the letter by Will Little.
We have one slide, so while they work on getting that up, I'll just summarize. So this gentleman, you'll recall that the septic upgrade program has kind of morphed over time. So in the original plan, there were 1,625 parcels that were identified as the highest priority sites to upgrade from conventional septic to advanced septic. And then after we had mailed all of those 1,625 people and got a fairly low response rate, we wanted to reduce nitrogen loading to the lagoon as soon as possible. A couple changes were made. One was to create a prorated program where it didn't matter whether the program funded this one high priority house or these 2 or 3 medium priority houses. If the load to the lagoon was reduced the same amount and we got it done, that was a step in the right direction. So the plan was expanded to create a prorated program that allowed anybody to participate, but the amount of funding that they would get for upgrading their system would be based on the amount of nitrogen load reduction that was calculated using the state-approved arc inlet model as a basis. The original prorated amount that was approved in the plan was $700. Then last year, that in order to try to increase participation in the program, that dollar amount or the rate was changed from $700 to $1,200 per pound. This gentleman, his email indicates that he contacted us back in the original stage when there were just the 1,625. You were either in or you were out. And so at that time, he was out. And so wanting to do what was good for the lagoon, he upgraded his system to an advanced septic system. And then in the latest cycle, at the $1,200 per pound rate, we sent postcards to everybody that would be eligible for a significant chunk of funding at that $1,200 rate. So he received a postcard saying, you're eligible for this grant program. So he contacted us and said, hey, when I contacted you before, you said no, and now I've got this postcard. In the meantime, I actually upgraded my system. Can you fund me or, repay me at least some amount as a retro pay? We actually have a handful of folks that are in the same boat. And so we've worked to, that's the list of people that have contacted us recently that have already upgraded their septic, didn't know they were eligible or were previously told that they were not eligible. And the amounts there are what they would be eligible for under the current program guidelines. Next slide. So if the committee, let me back up. When the county commission adopted the 2022 plan update, there were 3 people who had previously been funded at the $700 rate. And when the rate was changed to $1,200 in that plan, they asked, hey, can we get funded at that $1,200 rate? And Commissioner Tabaya made that a part of his motion for approval of the plan, that we do retro pay for that delta increase in cost share for those 3 people. And so based on that board direction, we have done retro pay for those 3. So sort of in keeping with that thought that the Board of County Commissioners wanted to reward the early adopters. These are folks who've been looking out in the best interest of the lagoon. They're champions for what the lagoon plan is trying to do. We tried to think about, well, what are some possible conditions or considerations that we don't want to go to the county commission on a case-by-case basis. If we can come up with a list of criteria, if it meets these criteria, we should go ahead and do process a retro pay. So we brainstormed among staff. This is the list of criteria that we have come up with. So I don't know if you want me to go through these or Matt can explain them. And my thought is that if this is something that the committee wants to recommend, we could then take your recommendation to the county commission, get their direction on, when, where, if any retro pay should be awarded to these individuals as they come up. We have done this large mailing. We don't anticipate, expanding to a larger mailing. And so we think we've kind of captured the universe of who would be affected by this. There may be a few more out there. So, if this is something that people want to do, we would like to have criteria that could apply to a few more if there happen to be a few more out there that contact us next week. And not have to come back and have a huge discussion every time.
All right, thank you. Dr. Winter?
Is this a time-sensitive matter? Because my thought is, this list, I think this is the first time I've seen this. I would like a chance to digest it a little bit. And maybe in the meantime, if anybody else who's hearing this would like to let your office know that they would like to apply for, maybe we can make this an agenda item. I know you're not going to be here for our next meeting, so, if you would want to be here for this would be maybe the September meeting? Or is that too far in the, I mean, I'm okay with August if you're okay with, whoever's here to go through the process.
Committees, whatever the committee wants.
So, I would recommend we
Table it.
table this for now and do it in August.
Okay, Susan?
I was going to say, I agree with Dr. Windsor, I'd table it so we can kind of digest it. At first, at glance, it looks good, but to get other people the opportunity to apply.
Okay, well, I think the application, I'm with tabling it. I think the application may even extend when we pass it, but, okay, anyone else have other comment?
Just the general idea of not punishing early adopters, but rather rewarding them. These are the guys that you should be, rewarding for being champions. And I would think that it would make me, if I was in their situation, somewhat, upset that, I'm out leading the charge and I'm going to be punished for that. Why? So finding a mechanism by which it can be fairly done, because you don't want to open up, a floodgate of issues of, claims that are inappropriate. So, first glance also, it looks great. But yeah, I agree it's important.
Okay. And I think setting up a policy, giving us some time to look at it and digest it is probably a good idea. Okay, anyone else have, there's a motion, and was there a motion to table it? I don't think so. I think it was a motion?
Yeah, motion to table.
Okay.
Yeah.
I second.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right, I will say, and when you guys do look at this, I do love Virginia. I think it was a great job, $6,000 being the max, which is the difference between an advanced and a normal, which David, I think, then lets people benefit for going above and beyond. And then the 100K max. I do like both of those. They're good. So, all right, any public comment to table it? Is it based on tabling it? That's the motion. No? Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor of tabling this until August, say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. All right, so we have 4 minutes left in our extension. I have 4 people who have put public comments, so that's 12 minutes at least. So if we could get maybe, I'd say a 15-minute extension would definitely cover us.
Somebody else.
Anyone want a motion for a 15-minute extension?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second? All right. Any discussion? Oh,
Are
wait,
you going to vote? She
Laura
needs
Lee?
to stay for just one moment.
Even though we passed the virtual votes? Heather?
I think you still need the quorum
For any vote, even though we, okay. We're just going to do one vote real quick. All right, so extending for another 15 minutes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thanks, Laura Lee. Okay.
And I may have to leave a couple minutes
Okay,
before that.
all right, well, then we'll go ahead and we'll start with public comment. The first public comment was Clint.
Yeah, this is not really a comment. I've been in here before talking with y'all, which y'all know. I met some nice people that work here and all. So I'm coming down to let y'all know I got a video that I'm putting out because of everything y'all doing a lot of good things. There's no doubt. A lot of things that need to be done. But in my own personal opinion, which luckily I'm allowed to have, we're not spending enough on the river. You got the scientists over here trying to get the oysters, figure out what's going on. She's over here worrying about how much a piece of wire costs to build a basket. That shouldn't be an issue. We're not putting enough money into the water, into good projects, or projects where we just got something going on, When they got to worry about how much a piece of wire costs so they can build a basket, that's not what this is all about. My video is complaining about the system, not the people on this board, but Sorrel itself. Most people voted on this expecting the money to go to the river. Most folks want the water cleaned up. They want whatever done that can be done. Not one project out here is going to fix it. It's going to take projects all up and down the board to try to do this. It's not going to be one Oyster project on one dock or 3 or 4 docks on one end over here. It's going to be projects everywhere so we can see what is going on. Can't get a good sample on anything, one little piece at a time. So I've made my own video. Not calling anybody out, it's complaining about the process for getting money to people that can do their little part. Right now we got big companies, we got contractors coming from out of state bidding on jobs here with money that you're taking from the people of the county. All right. So when y'all see the video, just know this is not against any individual here. It's against the process and the county commissioner and the state, whoever wrote this thing up so damn complicated that somebody like myself can't get in. And yes, it's in there, it's got what I want to do. There's too many projects that can be done by smaller groups, individuals, if they have the money. Because as y'all know, you can't do a damn thing on this river if you don't have some money. There's not a project out here that you can do for free. And y'all, the process is not allowing to get more people involved. And until we get more people involved, nothing's going to change. So the video, when y'all see it, just know it's not against the individuals here. It's against this process. This is more complicated. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a politician. And I really pissed off about it. There's 600,000 people as of 2022 that live here in Brevard County. I will reach at least 500,000 of them in the next month. I got my video, my QR code's coming, my website's being changed, and I'm going to get the word out that this got to change. So just wanted to say, no, for a fact, it's not against any individuals here at all. It's this process that y'all make so complicated that the normal person in this county that right now is just trying to survive could give a shit less about all of this. Y'all want to reach them, but nobody's getting down where they are, where they work, where they live. I mean, this government thing, most people see county or state coming, they don't want to talk to y'all. They don't want to see you. You know, they really don't. And y'all know that. Y'all should know that. People are, just a regular working class guy is not interested in this politic. I'm not. That's why I'm taking my views and my opinions to the people that elect these county commissioners and everybody else that are making these things so hard to do. $500 million. You know, $500 million, and we can't get more done than what we're doing.
Thanks, Clint. Thank you. Okay, Sandra?
Sandra Sullivan, South Patrick Shores. So I really enjoyed Dr. Hansen's presentation today. And I just wanted to add one point about what is coming out and being talked a lot about around the scientific community is that these projects are increasing the oxygen, which is creating the seagrass to revive in those areas. So that's an intangible, really, that's super important. What I wanted to talk about today is health and safety. And this has to do with Grand Canal. As you know, the University of Florida study came out, and the levels of PFAS in my area are as high as 4 times the health advisory limit. And it was a concern back when this project was first proposed. I went and met with the director of Florida DEP and Randy Fine's office and begged to have the PFAS tested. So we've come a long way since then. This is a announcement from the EPA in June announcing that the drinking water advisories for 4 PFAS compounds have been drastically lowered. So this is an emerging contaminant. We don't know just how bad it is. We're trucking this trash to Platte Ranch, which is just south of our drinking water source on the floodplains. And we don't know, we know this is a very mobile chemical. It moves very rapidly in the environment. And so just north, it's North Flowing River, is Lake Washington, our drinking water source. As an unregulated chemical is not being tested, but starting next year they'll start testing it. But we should be testing for 2 components and I say we shouldn't even be putting it on near the St. John's floodplains. But arsenic is a Class A carcinogen that is also in that MOC. It's going out there at the commercial cleanup target level. It's being amended by that big mountain of sand, so there's levels greater, it's just amended down to the legal limit. And this winter is the first winter we had 2 algae blooms. Arsenic is a phosphorus food source for algae. Okay, you can look up the scientific literature. And so are we causing other issues in another watershed by taking contaminated muck and spreading contamination and putting the health and safety of our residents at risk? And I really think we should most definitively have this testing in place, especially now that the science is catching up and we know that these chemicals are far more dangerous than they previously thought. And so the magnitude that it was adjusted, the new advisory for PFOA is 17,500 times lower than the old of 770 parts per trillion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. And so we did have Danielle Cordona had their hand up, a virtual. Send it, Terry, I know you've got your hand up. Did you have something you want to say, or can it wait till the committee comments?
Yeah, it can wait.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Danielle Cordona, I'm going to allow you to talk and give you 3 minutes. I hope I said your name right. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Gus, are you guys able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, so just a comment on the video. It's not producing sound for the online viewers. That was all.
Okay, did you want to make that comment?
No, he said the.
Oh, you couldn't hear the videos. Okay. All right, sorry about that.
Correct.
Brandon, I know the videos will be on our Facebook page, right?
Yeah, they'll eventually be released on Facebook and YouTube, but I'll get with Logan to see what the sound issues were. I
Okay,
just followed his instructions on that.
great. Okay, awesome, thank you. Okay, the last card we have is Dontavia Smith.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Dontavia Smith, Cocoa, Florida. I just want to say it's been a pleasure, first of all, to even sit here and be at meetings consistently and learn more about the lagoon. I am educated, but when it comes to this lagoon, it's a lot of environmental science that I didn't go to school for. I want to give a shout out to Mr. Brandon Smith, because I did watch the video where his videos were the program's videos as I was coming over. They were awesome, they were dope, but as you said, there needed some content for constituents, residents to understand exactly what the lagoon does, what it's doing, and what's the process of making it better. I want to kind of empathize with the guy that was speaking earlier. There's a lot of science, like I said, it's a lot of science and legal language in this process, and for a lot of residents I know who really actually care can't really give a lot of insight because they don't understand the language. So I would suggest, just a suggestion as a citizen, of clarifying the language so citizens can understand it better, and also adding some content to the videos too. And it is an exciting video because the essence of the Space Coast is our lagoon, I believe, and it's beautiful from that sky view, from the 4K, and it's awesome. But to give a little more content of actually what the lagoon is doing, why it's this way, and why the money we have and we're putting it towards it, why we're doing it. Just a lot of key questions or key answers.
No, lagoon video or meeting running long.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. It's just you're good. It's a virtual meeting. Problems.
Okay, cool.
Go ahead.
Just some keynotes to add, but you guys are doing an awesome job, for real, seriously, and keep doing the hard work, and but just spend the money wisely. Have a good day. Bye bye.
Thank you, Dontavia. And I will say, along with before you leave, Don Davies, our contact information is on our website. And so I know David and I have worked with Clint and given him lots of our time, and I still would love to work with him more. And so I think if there's any resident, even you, and there's something that you think we should change, reach out to us,
Yes,
any
sir.
of us.
Yes,
Because
sir.
you're right. None of us, I know I'll speak for myself, not Dr. Windsor. I wasn't an environmental scientist either when I started, but I've become one. But you do lose that objectivity as a regular citizen because we look at this all the time.
Right.
So for anyone else out there, reach out to us and show us areas that we could do better. We'll gladly, try to incorporate it.
I appreciate the invitation. I sure
Yeah,
will.
please do.
Thank you very much. Have a
All
good day,
right.
guys.
Take care. Okay. So with that, Terry, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Jenny earlier for her presentation. I don't know if she's still here or not. Marine Resource Council is doing a shoreline restoration project using the concrete prisms. They're on the shoreline there next to the Lagoon house. I encourage you, if you have time, stop by there, take a walk down over the bank, down the stairs, and check out what's going on. Katie Savoya, our deputy director, has been working on that project, doing sand accretion, and now we've got an extensive array of the Oyster prisms, which was a real job getting them down over the bank and located along the water, but it's both wave break and habitat for oysters. MRC is also working a project using what I call them mangrove anchors. They're the same jute concrete constructs, but they've got a mangrove planted in them. And what that does is securely anchor the mangroves so you can go out and plant these smaller plants and give them a chance to survive the wave action. So just a heads up, that's a place you can go look and see some of the good work that's being done in the lagoon. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Terry. All right. Anyone else? Any other comments? Oh, Dr. Windsor and then David?
Yeah, real quickly, this is board comments, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mechanical harvesting was mentioned earlier, and I've reached out to my own community, and in the city of Melbourne, they don't feel that mechanical harvesting is very effective in the city in dealing, and so they're going to continue on with glyphosate and 2,4-D as routine sprayings throughout the canals in the city. And the message that came to me was it's not possible to do mechanical harvesting. I'm not sure if it's not possible or if it's, if there's some other hitch in the process. So at some point in the future, I'm going to keep following up on this. I would like to find out more about mechanical harvesting versus spraying and what absolutely has to be sprayed and what can we get away with mechanical harvesting? Because I think we've only gotten the positive view of mechanical harvesting, and it should do away with all spraying. But I think that because there's a big health and safety issue with flooding, that takes priority over everything else in our state statutes. And so I think it's really important for us to understand that, at least for the near future, some spraying is going to keep going on with something that kills plants.
Yeah.
Okay? Thanks.
Virginia, maybe we can look at putting that in future topics. Because I agree with you, Dr. Windsor, and I always say, I'd love to have everybody have harvesters, but if you buy a harvester and it sits on a trailer somewhere and isn't being used because you don't have the personnel to use it, or it's not financially viable, then that money may not be best spent that way. David, did you have something?
I was just going to add some things. Clint has left, but some things that he was mentioning that came to mind.
You got 2 minutes.
Okay, I'm trying to hurry here. So one of the things was he had, we're taking the money of the citizens of the county and using it to fix the lagoon, which, is great. Although I thought something was very wise about the way this was done. It was done as a sales tax. Which means everybody that visits here is also contributing to that with that half cent. I live in Cocoa Beach. There's like 20,000 residents. We have a couple million tourists, and every dollar spent at Ron John, those guys that are coming here and using our, beaches and our lagoon are helping to fix things, which I think is an important thing to keep in mind as well, which was it was a great way to do things. Clint has a couple other ideas, some of which are great. I love his passion. I've worked with him before I was on this committee. I had him helping set up oyster habitats at my house and so on. I think some things are less correct. He's got, some great thoughts, and I'll continue to, try to work with him one-on-one on some things. But anyway, I thought the sales tax thing is an important thing to get into the record, to remind people that, the way this is done, everybody that visits here is helping to make the lagoon a little bit better too. It's not just, taxing the county citizens, it's taxing everybody that comes here.
Yeah. And there are lots of other funding sources, and since Dr. DeFries sends people my way all the time, I'm going to send people back to him. There is, I think NEP did have a small grant funding process for smaller grants. And so if we do have people that are working on the lagoon and would love to work on something and get involved, I think there are other avenues that they can take to start funding those projects. But anyways, I'm sure I'll talk to Clint after the meeting. So, all right, 1 minute left. Anyone else have anything?
I'm going to have one more thing. So with all the presentations we've had from different, have we come up with a way to have those indexed with the topics that are covered within the presentation that makes it easy for people to find? Like, one of the things Clint and I have discussed a lot is, Clint, like I used to think, thinks aeration is going to solve everything. He puts in his bubblers and everything's going to be fixed. And it does have some benefits, but it doesn't solve everything. And there was a good presentation and study where we put aerators, at the ends of lagoons, and it didn't solve the problems. It'd be great to be able to easily find that and share it. Do we have the hashtag type
I'm
of
working
searching?
on right now, taking the list that Dr. Windsor gave us of all the presentations and putting those into categories and subcategories so we can get them organized on the website in an easy to find manner.
That's great. I think it'll be a huge resource as much as the website on the phone.
Yeah, we're partway through the list. We're just plugging away as we can.
All right.
Thanks.
Okay, that'll do it. Thanks, everybody. Tune in next month, same time, same place. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week or month.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous